Chapter 1. The Genesis of Auctions. From Ancient Markets to Modern Practices. Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we embark on a quiet journey, tracing the delicate thread that connects ancient marketplaces to the sophisticated auction houses of today. Our focus: the economic mechanisms of auctions and the intricate ballet of bidding strategies. We'll consider the formats, the revenue they generate, and, perhaps most importantly, their efficiency in allocating resources. Before we delve into the modern intricacies, however, let us pause and observe the seeds from which this system sprung. Imagine, if you will, the bustling agora of ancient Greece. A tapestry of merchants hawking their wares, bartering and haggling under the Mediterranean sun. Though not auctions in the formal sense we understand them now, these early markets contained the primordial elements of price discovery. Goods changed hands through a negotiation process, a dance of supply and demand shaped by the immediate context. Think of it as a nascent form of competitive bidding, a precursor to the structured formats that would emerge centuries later. These ancient exchanges lacked the rigid rules and predefined procedures that characterize modern auctions. Yet, the fundamental principle was present. Value emerged through interaction, through the collective assessment of worth. Objects, livestock, even land, were acquired through methods that sought to balance the seller's desire for a good price and the buyer's willingness to pay. We can see, even in these unstructured environments, the faint glimmer of auction theory taking shape. Moving forward in time, we encounter more formalized, auction-like events. Consider the Roman Empire, where the spoils of war were often sold to the highest bidder. These were not merely transactions. They were displays of power, punctuations in the rhythm of conquest. The auction became a tool for converting seized assets into usable capital, a mechanism for distributing wealth, albeit wealth acquired through conflict. Here, we see a nascent understanding of revenue generation, the auction as a method for maximizing returns on a given set of assets. It's important to remember, however, that these historical examples were often marred by inefficiencies and inequity. Information asymmetry, where one party possesses significantly more knowledge than the other, was rampant. Collusion among bidders, aimed at artificially suppressing prices, was not uncommon. These early auctions, while serving a purpose, were far from perfect examples of market efficiency. They were, in essence, learning experiences, paving the way for refinements in both format and regulation. Now, let us consider a gradual shift in focus. As societies evolved, so too did their trading practices. The medieval period saw the rise of fairs and markets across Europe, each with its own customs and conventions. While many transactions remained rooted in direct negotiation, the seeds of more organized auctions were being sown. Specific days might be designated for particular goods, creating a concentrated pool of potential buyers and sellers. The intensity of these events could lead to bidding wars, driven by scarcity or desirability. The classical economist, centuries later, would carefully observe these phenomena, seeking to understand the underlying principles that governed these interactions. They would begin to formulate mathematical models to describe bidding behavior, attempting to predict outcomes and optimize strategies. This analytical lens, this quest for understanding, marked a significant turning point in the evolution of auction theory. The informal practices of the past began to be codified, examined, and refined. The policymaker, ever seeking to improve market efficiency, would later grapple with the challenges of designing auctions that promote fairness and maximize revenue for the public good. Spectrum auctions, the sale of licenses to use radio frequencies, provide a prime example. These auctions, often involving complex bidding rules and sophisticated strategies, demonstrate the power of auction theory in allocating valuable resources. As we transition from these historical foundations to the structured formats of modern auctions, it is crucial to remember this evolution. The journey from the ancient marketplace to the contemporary auction house is a testament to the enduring human desire to facilitate exchange and optimize resource allocation. This understanding of the past, of the slow and sometimes turbulent emergence of these trading mechanisms, helps us appreciate the complexities and the nuances of the system we study today. So, as we prepare to move forward, consider this. How will the next wave of technological innovation reshape the auction landscape? Will decentralized platforms and blockchain technology fundamentally alter the power dynamics between buyers and sellers? We will explore this and other topics soon. For now, sleep well. Defining auctions. Core principles and mechanisms. Welcome back. We've considered the broad strokes of scarcity and value. Now, let's gently narrow our focus. Our voyage now carries us into the heart of auction theory, defining the core principles and mechanisms that govern these fascinating economic ecosystems. Imagine, if you will, a bustling marketplace, not chaotic, but ordered by rules, by subtle games of strategy and information. At its core, an auction is a mechanism for allocating goods or services amongst potential buyers. It's a discovery process, revealing individual valuations and aggregating them into a market-clearing price. But not all auctions are created equal. They differ in format, information structures, and ultimately, in the revenue they generate and the efficiency with which they allocate resources. Think of it as a delicate dance between supply and demand, choreographed by the auction's rules. Let us begin by outlining some fundamental auction formats. The English auction, also known as the ascending bid auction, is perhaps the most familiar. Bidders openly compete, raising their bids until only one remains. The highest bidder wins and pays their final bid. It's a transparent process where the price discovery unfolds gradually. The Dutch auction, conversely, is a descending bid auction. The auctioneer starts with a high price, gradually lowering it until a bidder accepts. It's a race against time, a gamble on predicting when the price will reach its lowest acceptable level. Then, there are the sealed bid auctions. Here, bidders submit their bids privately and simultaneously. In a first price, sealed bid auction, the highest bidder wins and pays their own bid. This format demands careful strategic consideration, as bidders must weigh the risk of bidding too low and losing the item against the risk of bidding too high and overpaying. A variant is the Vickrey auction, or second price sealed bid auction. The highest bidder still wins, but they pay only the second highest bid. Intriguingly, this seemingly simple change has profound implications for bidding behavior. Now, let's consider the lens of revenue. Which auction format generates the highest revenue for the seller? This is a question that has occupied economists for decades. The revenue equivalence theorem, under certain assumptions, suggests that different auction formats can yield the same expected revenue. Specifically, if bidders are risk neutral, have independent private values, and the auction is efficient, then the English, Dutch, first price sealed bid, and Vickrey auctions all generate the same expected revenue for the seller. This is a powerful result, highlighting the subtle interplay of information and strategy. However, the assumptions underlying this theorem are crucial. Deviations from these assumptions, such as risk aversion among bidders or correlation in their valuations, can lead to significant differences in revenue. Efficiency, in the context of auctions, refers to allocating the good or service to the bidder who values it the most. An efficient auction ensures that resources are used optimally, maximizing overall welfare. While revenue equivalence might hold under idealized conditions, efficiency can vary across auction formats. The English and Vickrey auctions, for example, are generally considered to be efficient, as they incentivize bidders to reveal their true valuations. The first price sealed bid auction, however, can be less efficient if risk aversion leads bidders to shade their bids below their true values, potentially resulting in the good being allocated to someone who values it less. Furthermore, the information structure plays a vital role. In a private values auction, each bidder knows their own valuation for the item, and this valuation is independent of what others know. In a common value auction, the item has the same value for everyone, but bidders have different information about that value. This introduces the infamous winner's curse, where the winning bidder tends to have overestimated the item's true value. Understanding the information structure is crucial for designing auctions that are both efficient and revenue maximizing. The classical economist painstakingly studied these situations, attempting to understand them. The policymaker, meanwhile, must consider all these intricate factors when designing real-world auctions, from spectrum auctions to procurement contracts. They are balancing the delicate scale of social welfare, while not tipping over the market. We've explored the core formats, revenue considerations, and efficiency implications of auctions. But a question lingers in the air, like the scent of old books in a university library. How do bidders actually behave within these strategic environments? What are the optimal bidding strategies, and how do they depend on the auction format, the information structure, and the risk preferences of the bidders? This, my friends, is the next phase of our economic journey. Auction theory. Vickrey's landmark contribution and its impact having gently traced the rudimentary forms of early market exchange, we now find ourselves at the threshold of a more formalized and, dare I say, elegant system, the auction. These structured encounters, governed by clear rules and strategies, offer a fascinating microcosm of economic principles in action. Tonight, our focus settles upon the work of one luminary, whose insights reshaped our understanding of these competitive marketplaces. Auctions, in their essence, are mechanisms for allocating goods or services to the highest bidder. But the seemingly simple concept belies a complex interplay of information, valuation, and strategic behavior. The tapestry of auction formats is rich and varied. There is the ascending bid auction, familiar to many as the traditional English auction, where prices steadily climb until only one bidder remains. Conversely, the descending bid, or Dutch auction, starts with a high price that gradually decreases until a buyer emerges, a format often employed for perishable goods like flowers. Then we have sealed bid auctions, where all participants submit their bids simultaneously and privately, adding a layer of uncertainty and psychological maneuvering. Within sealed bid auctions, we find further variations, most notably the first price sealed bid auction, where the highest bidder wins and pays their bid, and the second price sealed bid auction. It is here, with the introduction of the second price sealed bid auction, that the landscape was forever altered. The intellectual current shifted with the arrival of the economists, whose profound work illuminated the surprisingly efficient, and at times, counterintuitive properties of this format. In a second price sealed bid auction, the highest bidder wins, but crucially, pays only the second highest bid. This seemingly subtle adjustment has dramatic consequences for bidding strategies. The core of the economist's contribution lies in demonstrating that, under certain assumptions, it is a dominant strategy for each bidder to bid their true valuation of the item being auctioned. Think of it as an elegant alignment of incentives. Bidding less than your true value risks losing the item at a price you would have been willing to pay. Bidding more than your true value risks winning the item, but paying a price that exceeds its worth to you. The optimal strategy, the one that maximizes your expected utility regardless of the other bidder's actions, is to simply reveal your sincere assessment. The implications of this revelation are far-reaching. First, the second price sealed bid auction, now often referred to as the Vickrey auction in honor of its originator, achieves allocative efficiency. This means that the item is awarded to the bidder who values it most highly, maximizing overall welfare. The system, in its delicate balance, guides the resource to its most valued destination. This outcome, a cornerstone of economic well-being, becomes more probable with this clever auction design. Second, the Vickrey auction provides a benchmark against which other auction formats can be judged. We can analyze other auction types by comparing their revenue-generating potential, their susceptibility to collusion, and their overall efficiency relative to this ideal. It's a point of equilibrium, a place where efficiency finds its firmest footing. The policymaker, keen to optimize the allocation of public resources, has been particularly interested in this comparison. However, the theoretical elegance of the Vickrey auction must be tempered by the realities of the world. The assumption of independent private values, the notion that each bidder's valuation is independent of others, is often violated. In many auctions, valuations are interdependent, influenced by shared knowledge or the actions of other bidders. This can lead to strategic complexities and potential inefficiencies. Furthermore, the Vickrey auction, while efficient, may not always generate the highest revenue. Other auction formats, such as the first price sealed bid auction, can sometimes extract more surplus from bidders, particularly when bidders are risk-averse. The quest for optimal revenue often involves a trade-off with efficiency, a balancing act that demands careful consideration. The lasting impact of the economist's work lies not only in the specific properties of the Vickrey auction, but also in the development of a framework for analyzing and comparing different auction mechanisms. It offered a lens through which to view the intricacies of bidding strategies, information asymmetry, and the design of markets that encourage efficient allocation. It is a legacy that continues to shape the field of economics, influencing the design of auctions for everything from spectrum licenses to online advertising. As we prepare to move forward, one question lingers. How do these auction principles adapt in an age where the information available to bidders becomes less private and more readily accessible? Chapter 4: Private Value Auctions. Understanding bidders' intrinsic valuations. Welcome back. In our previous exploration, we laid the groundwork for understanding the fundamental structures of auction theory. Now, let us gently shift our focus. Instead of the broad strokes of auction formats, we'll delve into the fascinating world of private value auctions. This is where the true essence of individual valuation comes to the fore. Here, each bidder possesses a unique intrinsic value for the item being auctioned, a value known only to themselves. Think of a rare book collector bidding on a first edition. The book's sentimental value, its place in their collection, or even its potential resale value as they perceive it, all contribute to a private valuation. This value exists independently of what other bidders might think. This is a crucial distinction, as it shapes their bidding strategies. The key characteristic of private value auctions is the independence of valuations. One bidder's assessment has absolutely no impact on another's. The watercolor painting that sings to one person may leave another cold. The chipped antique porcelain doll may be someone's last missing piece. Each value is a self-contained universe. Now, how do these private valuations influence bidding behavior? Consider the first price sealed bid auction. In this format, each bidder submits a single, sealed bid. The highest bidder wins and pays the amount they bid. The strategic complexity lies in balancing the desire to win with the desire to avoid overpaying. The classical economist would tell us that, under the assumption of risk neutrality, bidders will shade their bids below their true valuations. This bid shading arises because each bidder recognizes that if they bid their exact valuation, they will only win if they are tied with another bidder, and will earn zero profit. By bidding slightly less, they increase their chances of winning at a profitable price. The extent of this bid shading depends on the number of bidders. With more participants, the likelihood of facing fierce competition increases, leading to more aggressive bidding and less shading. The water becomes more agitated, and the flow more pressured. Conversely, with fewer bidders, the auction resembles a quieter, more reflective pool, allowing for more conservative strategies. Another prevalent format is the second price sealed bid auction, also known as the Vickrey auction. Here, the highest bidder wins, but pays the second highest bid. This seemingly subtle difference has profound implications for bidding behavior. In this setting, bidding one's true valuation becomes a dominant strategy. Meaning, regardless of what other bidders do, bidding your true valuation always yields the best expected outcome. Why is this so? If you bid less than your true valuation, you risk losing the auction even if the second highest bid is below your true value. If you bid more than your true valuation, you risk winning and paying more than the item is worth to you. Therefore, honesty, in this peculiar auction landscape, becomes the optimal strategy. This is one of the most celebrated and often surprising results in auction theory. From a revenue perspective, both the first price and second price sealed bid auctions, under certain assumptions, are expected to generate the same revenue for the seller. This is a manifestation of the revenue equivalence theorem, a cornerstone concept in auction theory. The policymaker, seeking to maximize revenue from spectrum auctions or oil leases, would be keenly aware of this principle. However, practical considerations often complicate this theoretical equivalence. Risk aversion among bidders, asymmetries in information, and the presence of reserve prices can all lead to deviations from the predicted revenue. The elegant simplicity of the theory often clashes with the messy reality of the auction room. The private value model provides a crucial foundation for understanding auction dynamics. It allows us to isolate the impact of individual valuations on bidding behavior and revenue generation. But what happens when bidders' valuations are not entirely independent? What happens when their information is intertwined, like vines of ivy? Our next journey will explore the complex terrain of common value auctions, where the unknown truth binds all bidders together. Common value auctions, navigating uncertainty and the winner's curse. Tonight, we delve into the fascinating world of common value auctions. Unlike scenarios where each bidder possesses a unique personal valuation for an item, here the underlying value is the same for everyone. Think of an auction for offshore oil drilling rights, or a jar filled with coins. The oil is worth a certain amount, and the coins add up to a precise figure. However, no one knows that true value with certainty. Each bidder has an estimate, an appraisal based on imperfect information. This shared, uncertain valuation creates a dynamic far more complex than in our previous discussions. The defining characteristic of a common value auction is, of course, the common value itself. But it's the uncertainty surrounding that value that truly shapes bidding strategies and auction outcomes. Each bidder conducts their own due diligence, analyzing available data to arrive at an estimate. These estimates naturally will vary. The key question then becomes, how does a rational bidder account for the fact that their estimate, however carefully constructed, is likely imperfect and potentially skewed? This brings us to the specter that haunts common value auctions, the winner's curse. The winner's curse describes the tendency for the winning bidder to overpay, precisely because they won. Consider the implications. The highest bidder is likely the bidder with the most optimistic estimate. If all estimates are randomly distributed around the true value, the highest estimate is more likely to be an overestimate. Consequently, the winner ends up paying more than the item is actually worth. The winner's curse is not a matter of bad luck. It is a predictable consequence of rational bidding behavior in the face of uncertainty. The classical economist, in their purest form, would assume that bidders should perfectly adjust their bids to account for the curse. They would reason that by subtracting the expected overestimation from their own estimate, a bidder can arrive at a bid that, on average, yields zero profit. This adjustment, known as shading the bid, is crucial for mitigating the risks of the winner's curse. However, the real world is rarely so neat. Perfectly adjusting for the winner's curse requires a precise understanding of the distribution of estimates, the number of bidders, and the specific auction format. In practice, bidders often struggle to fully account for these factors, leading to persistent overbidding, especially in first-price sealed bid auctions, where the winner pays their own bid. Different auction formats present different challenges in the context of common value. In a first-price sealed bid auction, the need to aggressively shade the bid to avoid the winner's curse can lead to lower overall revenue for the seller. Open ascending bid auctions, like the English auction, offer a degree of information revelation. As bidders drop out, they implicitly reveal their own lower estimates, providing remaining bidders with valuable data to refine their own valuations. This information sharing can mitigate the winner's curse to some extent, potentially leading to higher revenues for the seller. The policymaker, seeking to maximize revenue from a common value auction, must carefully consider the trade-offs between various auction formats. While the open ascending bid auction may seem preferable due to its information-revealing properties, strategic bidders can still manipulate the process. Moreover, the potential for collusion among bidders remains a constant concern, regardless of the format. Furthermore, the degree of information asymmetry plays a critical role. If some bidders possess superior information compared to others, they are better positioned to avoid the winner's curse and potentially extract more surplus. This can lead to an uneven playing field and distort the efficiency of the auction. Leveling the playing field through pre-auction information disclosure can improve both efficiency and revenue. The efficiency of common value auctions is a nuanced topic. Ideally, the item should be allocated to the bidder who can make the most productive use of it, based on their private information. However, The winner's curse and strategic bidding behavior can distort this outcome. Even in auctions that allocate the item to the bidder with the highest estimate, the resulting allocation may not be efficient if the winning bid exceeds the true value. In conclusion, common value auctions present a complex interplay of uncertainty, information, and strategic behavior. The winner's curse stands as a constant reminder of the challenges in accurately valuing assets in the absence of perfect information. Careful consideration of auction format, information disclosure, and potential for collusion is essential for both bidders and sellers seeking to navigate this treacherous terrain. Chapter 6. Independent, Private Value Auctions. A foundation model. Yes, we were just discussing the mechanics of game theory and its initial forays into economic modeling. Now, let us turn our attention to a specific application, a microcosm where strategic interaction blossoms, the world of auctions. More precisely, we shall examine auctions under the assumption of independent private values, or IPV. Think of this as a foundational model, a simplified lens through which to understand the more complex realities of bidding. The essence of IPV lies in its name. Each bidder holds a private value for the item being auctioned. This value represents their individual willingness to pay, derived from their unique circumstances and preferences. Crucially, these values are independent. My valuation holds no sway over yours, and vice versa. This independence provides a stable foundation, allowing us to build a framework of analysis. Consider, for instance, an antique teacup. I might deeply desire it for its historical significance, while you might merely see it as a charming addition to your collection. The private and independent nature of our valuations sets the stage for a fascinating dance of strategy. Now, let's navigate the familiar landscapes of auction formats. We encounter the ascending or English auction, where the price steadily climbs until only one bidder remains. Then there is the descending or Dutch auction, where the price starts high and decreases until someone shouts mine. Finally, we have the sealed bid auctions, the first price, where the highest bidder pays their own bid, and the second price, also known as the Vickrey auction, where the highest bidder wins but pays only the second highest bid. The classical economist, ever seeking efficiency, might ask, which auction format yields the highest revenue and allocates the item to the bidder who values it most? Under the idealized conditions of IPV, a remarkable result emerges: revenue equivalence. This theorem suggests that under certain assumptions, risk neutrality being a key one, various auction formats, including the English, Dutch, first price sealed bid, and second price sealed bid, generate the same expected revenue for the seller. The intuition behind revenue equivalence lies in the strategic adjustments bidders make. In a first price auction, bidders shade their bids, bidding below their true valuation to increase their chances of profit. In a second price auction, bidding your true value is a dominant strategy. This differing behavior balances out to achieve similar revenue outcomes, a delicate equilibrium in the auction ecosystem. However, the real world rarely adheres perfectly to the assumptions of IPV. The introduction of risk aversion, for example, disrupts the equilibrium. A risk-averse bidder will shade their bid even further in a first-price auction, potentially leading to lower revenue compared to the second-price format. Furthermore, if bidders believe that others possess superior information about the item's true value, if the assumption of independence crumbles, then the strategic landscape shifts dramatically. Turning our gaze to efficiency, the ideal auction format allocates the item to the bidder with the highest value. Under IPV, and with complete information, all the standard auction formats achieve this efficient outcome. The teacup, in our earlier example, would rightfully end up with the individual who truly cherishes it most, maximizing societal welfare. The policymaker, however, is often concerned with more than just revenue and efficiency. They might also consider fairness, access, and the potential for collusion. Auctions, while seemingly neutral mechanisms, can be vulnerable to manipulation and strategic gaming. Understanding these nuances is crucial for designing auctions that serve the broader public interest. Indeed, as we conclude this exploration of IPV auctions, we are left with a crucial question. What happens when the simplifying assumptions of independence and purely private valuations are relaxed? How do common values, where the item has an underlying value that is the same for all bidders, yet unknown, change the strategic calculus? That, my friends, will be our next avenue of inquiry, a journey into the fascinating and often treacherous terrain of common value auctions. Until then, sleep soundly, and may your dreams be filled with efficient allocations and revenue-maximizing strategies. The winner's curse. Avoiding pitfalls in common value scenarios. Last time, we explored the intricate dance of private values, where each bidder holds a unique assessment of an item's worth. Tonight, we turn our gaze toward a subtly different, yet equally compelling landscape: the common value auction. Think of it as a shift from individual perception to a shared, albeit imperfectly known, reality. Here, the true value of the object being auctioned is the same for everyone, but bidders possess varying degrees of information about that value. The classic example is an auction for drilling rights. While each oil company might have its own operational efficiencies, the amount of oil buried beneath the land is a single, fixed quantity. All the companies are ultimately trying to estimate the same thing, but their estimations are built on imperfect seismic data, geological surveys, and, frankly, educated guesses. This setting introduces a peculiar phenomenon known as the winner's curse. Imagine you are participating in such an auction. You win. Celebrations ensue. Champagne, corks, pop, all. But a nagging thought begins to creep in. If you won, it means your estimate of the oil reserves was higher than everyone else's. And if everyone else also conducted thorough analyses, their lower estimates might suggest that you overestimated. The higher your bid, the greater the likelihood you've fallen prey to the winner's curse, paying more than the true value of the asset. To understand how to navigate this treacherous terrain, let's consider optimal bidding strategies in a common value auction. The key is to shade your bid. To bid less than your estimate of the object's value. The degree of shading depends on several factors, including the number of bidders and the accuracy of your information. More bidders mean a higher chance that someone else has overestimated, requiring more aggressive shading. Similarly, less accurate information demands a more conservative bidding approach. The intuition behind this strategy is rooted in Bayesian reasoning. By shading your bid, you are implicitly acknowledging the possibility that your estimate is too high, and you are adjusting your bid downward to compensate for this potential error. It's about balancing the desire to win with the need to avoid overpaying. Auction formats also play a crucial role in determining the severity of the winner's curse. Sealed bid auctions, like first price sealed bid auctions, are particularly vulnerable because bidders don't have the opportunity to learn from the bids of others. English auctions, where bids are publicly announced and rise incrementally, can mitigate the curse to some extent. Observing other bidders dropping out at certain price points provides valuable information about their valuations, allowing remaining bidders to adjust their own estimates. The revenue equivalence theorem, which we briefly touched upon earlier, provides a fascinating insight here. While the theorem states that, under certain conditions, different auction formats will yield the same expected revenue for the seller, it is predicated on the assumption of risk neutrality and independent private values. When we introduce the common value element and the winner's curse, the theorem no longer holds in its pristine form. The seller's revenue can be affected by the choice of auction format, with formats that mitigate the winner's curse often leading to higher returns. Consider, for instance, a policymaker designing an auction for government bonds. If bidders are subject to the winner's curse, they might be hesitant to participate in a sealed bid auction, fearing they will overpay. An open auction format, with its transparency and opportunity for information sharing, might attract more bidders and result in a higher overall price for the bonds. In essence, the winner's curse is a powerful reminder that economic decisions are rarely made in a vacuum. Information is often incomplete, and strategic interactions among participants can have profound consequences. By understanding the dynamics of common value auctions and the pitfalls of the winner's curse, we can make more informed decisions, whether we are bidders, sellers, or policymakers shaping the rules of the game. But a lingering question remains. Beyond the auction hall, How do these principles extend to other areas of economic life, where uncertainty and information asymmetry reign supreme? Where might we next find ourselves bidding, not for oil rights or government bonds, but for something far more elusive? That, perhaps, is a question for another time. English auctions, dynamics and strategies. We've navigated the broad landscape of auction theory, charting its foundational principles. Now, let us turn our attention to a specific, and perhaps the most familiar auction format, the English auction, also known as the ascending bid auction. Think of it as the auction style we encounter most often in popular culture, the one with the auctioneer rapidly calling out increasing prices, seeking a higher and higher bid. The English auction is, at its core, a simple mechanism. Bidders openly submit increasing bids for the item at stake. The auction continues until only one bidder remains, and they win the item by paying the final price, the second highest valuation among all bidders. Its apparent simplicity, however, belies a fascinating complexity beneath the surface. Let's consider the fundamental strategy a bidder employs in this environment. In a world of independent private values, where each bidder knows their own valuation, but not those of others, the optimal strategy is remarkably intuitive. Continue bidding until the price reaches your own private valuation. This is known as truthful bidding. Why? Because bidding above your value risks winning the item at a price you deem too high, eroding your profit. Conversely, stopping bidding before the price reaches your valuation risks missing out on an opportunity to acquire the item at a profitable price. This strategy leads to a rather elegant outcome. In theory, the winner of an English auction is the bidder with the highest private valuation, and they pay a price equal to the second highest valuation. This outcome possesses a desirable property: efficiency. Efficiency, in this context, means that the item is allocated to the bidder who values it the most. The English auction, under ideal conditions, reliably achieves this. However, the real world is rarely so pristine. The assumption of independent private values, while analytically convenient, is often violated. In many auctions, bidders possess common values, meaning that the true value of the item is the same for all bidders, but each bidder has only an imperfect estimate of that value. Think of an auction for mineral rights. All bidders ultimately value the land based on the same underlying resource, but each has their own geological survey and interpretation. In the presence of common values, a new phenomenon emerges: the winner's curse. The winner's curse arises from the fact that the winning bidder is likely the one with the most optimistic estimate of the item's value. They won, after all, because they were willing to bid higher than anyone else. But if their estimate is too high, they may end up overpaying for the item, resulting in a loss. The classical economist might argue that rational bidders, aware of the winner's curse, will adjust their bidding strategies accordingly, shading their bids downwards to account for this risk. Furthermore, the English auction's dynamic nature makes it susceptible to strategic manipulation. Bidders might collude, forming cartels to suppress the price. They might engage in bid shielding, where one bidder artificially inflates the price to discourage other bidders, allowing a predetermined bidder to win at a lower price later on. Or they might even engage in shill bidding, where the seller, or someone acting on their behalf, places bids to drive up the price. The revenue generated by an English auction is largely determined by the distribution of bidders' valuations. On average, it tends to yield a revenue somewhere between the second highest and the highest valuation. The policymaker often considers this fact when deciding which type of auction to employ. While the English auction might not always guarantee the highest possible revenue, its efficiency and relative simplicity make it a popular choice. As we've explored, the English auction, while seemingly straightforward, presents a rich tapestry of strategic considerations. From the truthful bidding of independent private values to the complex calculations of common values, and the lurking threat of the winner's curse, the ascending bid auction reveals the subtle interplay of rationality, risk, and information. But consider now, what happens when the auctioneer throws a curveball and no longer reveals the current high bid? We now drift into the realm of sealed bid auctions. Chapter 9. Dutch auctions. Speed and risk. Last time, we explored the dynamics of ascending bid auctions, watching the price climb until only one determined bidder remained. Tonight, we turn our attention to its inverse, the Dutch auction, or descending bid auction, a format steeped in both speed and a certain inherent risk. Imagine, if you will, a clock, but instead of moving forward, its hand slowly descends. This is the essence of the Dutch auction. The auctioneer begins with a high price, one deliberately set above what they anticipate the market will bear. Slowly, steadily, the price falls. The first bidder willing to accept the current price calls out, effectively stopping the clock and securing the item at that level. It's a single, decisive moment. This rapid-fire nature is, perhaps, the Dutch auction's most alluring feature. Compared to the drawn-out process of an English auction, a Dutch auction resolves itself with remarkable speed. This efficiency can be particularly advantageous when dealing with perishable goods, such as cut flowers, a historical association that lends the auction its name. The swiftness mitigates spoilage, reducing waste and maximizing returns in time-sensitive markets. Consider the perspective of the seller. They initiate the auction with a price they deem to be optimistic, perhaps even bordering on ambitious. They watch, with bated breath, as the price declines. Their hope is that a buyer will emerge relatively early in the descent, securing a respectable price. However, there is an ever-present gamble. If no one bids quickly enough, the price can plummet, potentially falling below the seller's reserve price, resulting in a lower profit margin, or even a sale at a loss. Now, let us consider the bidder. In a Dutch auction, strategic timing is paramount. The bidder faces a delicate balancing act. They must assess their own valuation of the item, but also try to anticipate the valuations of other potential bidders. If they bid too early, they risk overpaying, leaving money on the table for the seller. But if they wait too long, another bidder may snatch the item first, leaving them empty-handed. The inherent tension in this scenario often leads to what economists call shading, a deliberate lowering of one's bid below their true valuation. In other words, bidders are often incentivized to bid slightly lower than what they are actually willing to pay, in an attempt to secure the item at a bargain price. This shading introduces a layer of inefficiency, as the final sale price may not truly reflect the highest value placed on the item. One might ask, why not simply hold an English auction, which, in theory, should reveal the true value of the item more effectively? The answer lies, primarily, in the advantages of speed and administrative simplicity. In situations where large quantities of identical items are being sold simultaneously, as is common in wholesale markets for agricultural products, a series of parallel Dutch auctions can be far more efficient than a corresponding set of ascending bid auctions. The rapid pace prevents bottlenecks and allows for a high throughput of goods. Furthermore, Dutch auctions can be useful in situations where the number of bidders is small, or where there is a high degree of uncertainty about the value of the item being sold. In these cases, the descending bid format can provide a degree of price discovery, helping to establish a market price in the absence of readily available information. However, the potential for collusion among bidders is a significant concern. If bidders can coordinate their actions, they can effectively force the price down to a level that is advantageous to them, potentially depriving the seller of significant revenue. The anonymity afforded by the Dutch auction format can make such collusion difficult to detect and prevent. From the policymaker's standpoint, understanding the nuances of Dutch auctions is crucial for ensuring market fairness and efficiency. Regulations designed to prevent collusion and to promote transparency in bidding practices can help to mitigate the risks associated with this unique auction format. Careful consideration must be given to the specific characteristics of the market in question and the potential impact of different regulatory approaches. Ultimately, the Dutch auction represents a fascinating study in risk and reward. It's a dance of anticipation, where speed and strategic timing are the keys to success. It embodies the tension between efficiency and price discovery, presenting both opportunities and challenges for sellers, bidders, and policymakers alike. But as we close this chapter, ponder this. How might these dynamics shift when dealing with auctions where multiple units are sold at the same time? That, my friends, is a question for another night. Chapter 10. First Price Sealed Bid Auctions. Strategic Considerations. Good evening. Having explored the fascinating landscape of auction formats, particularly the ascending price or English auction, we now turn our attention to a different, yet equally compelling, realm: the first price sealed bid auction. Imagine a collector's item, a rare manuscript, or even a government contract. Opportunities where transparency gives way to strategic opacity. In this auction format, each bidder submits a single sealed bid. The highest bidder wins and pays the amount they bid. Simple in its structure, but complex in its game-theoretic implications. Let us gently unpack this. The beauty of the first price sealed bid auction lies in its inherent tension. Unlike the English auction, where we observe the bids of our competitors unfolding in real time, here we are shrouded in uncertainty. We must anticipate the valuations and behaviors of others without direct knowledge of their intentions. It is a silent dance of conjecture and calculation. Consider the perspective of a rational bidder. The classical economist would tell us that bidding our true valuation is, in almost all circumstances, a grave error. Why? Because winning with a bid equal to our valuation yields zero profit. The entire purpose of participating in the auction is to achieve a positive surplus, a gain from trade. Therefore, we must shade our bid, strategically bidding below our true valuation to capture some of the potential gains. The extent of this shading, however, is not arbitrary. It depends crucially on our beliefs about the other bidders. How many other bidders are there? What are their likely valuations? And, perhaps, most importantly, how aggressively will they bid? The more competitors we face, and the more aggressively we expect them to bid, the more we must shade our own bid to maintain a reasonable probability of winning, while still ensuring a positive profit margin. This interplay of risk and reward creates a delicate equilibrium. Imagine a river, its current representing the pressure to bid aggressively and win. On one bank lies the danger of overbidding, of paying too much and eroding potential profits. On the opposite bank lurks the peril of underbidding, of being too cautious and losing the opportunity to acquire the item. The successful bidder navigates this river skillfully, finding the optimal balance between aggression and prudence. Formally modeling the strategic interaction often involves concepts from game theory, specifically Bayesian-Nash equilibrium. This equilibrium describes a situation where each bidder's strategy, their bidding function, is a best response to the strategies of all other bidders, given their beliefs about the valuations. Determining this equilibrium requires assumptions about the distribution of valuations among the bidders and their risk preferences. Now, the policymaker, ever concerned with efficiency, might ask, how does the first price sealed bid auction compare to other formats in terms of revenue and efficiency? In terms of revenue, under certain assumptions, symmetry of bidders, risk neutrality, the revenue equivalence theorem, suggests that the first price sealed bid auction generates the same expected revenue as the English auction, the Dutch auction, and the second price sealed bid auction. This is a remarkable result, highlighting the power of auction design. However, efficiency, defined as allocating the item to the bidder with the highest valuation, is a more nuanced issue. While the first price sealed bid auction typically achieves efficiency under the same assumptions that guarantee revenue equivalence, this can be disrupted when bidders are risk-averse. Risk aversion tends to drive bidders to bid more aggressively, potentially distorting the allocation and reducing overall efficiency. The river, once smooth, begins to churn with unpredictable currents. Therefore, the first price sealed bid auction, while seemingly straightforward, presents a rich tapestry of strategic considerations. The need to shade bids, the influence of competitor valuations, and the impact of risk aversion all contribute to a complex and fascinating economic landscape. And as we prepare to conclude this chapter, consider this: if valuations are, in reality, not independently distributed, if there exists some degree of common value, how does this fundamental change ripple through the dynamics of the auction? This question of common values will be the next current that guides our exploration of this intriguing field. Chapter 11. Second Price Sealed Bid Auctions. Truthful Bidding. Good evening. We've explored various auction formats, each a unique mechanism for allocating resources and extracting value. Last time, we considered the dynamics of first price sealed bid auctions, where strategic bidding requires shading one's true valuation. Now, we turn our attention to a rather elegant alternative, the second price sealed bid auction, also known as the Vickrey auction, named after a pivotal figure in auction theory. It's a system designed in essence to promote honesty. Think of it as a carefully calibrated scale, aiming to balance the information asymmetry between the seller and potential buyers. The Vickrey auction operates on a simple principle. Bidders submit sealed bids, and the highest bidder wins, but pays only the second highest bid. This subtle shift in payment structure dramatically alters the strategic landscape. Let's consider the incentives at play. Suppose you, a discerning collector, truly value a rare artifact at, say, $100. In a first price auction, bidding your full valuation would be a risky proposition. You might win, but you'd be leaving no surplus on the table, potentially overpaying if others also value the item highly. The incentive is to shade your bid, anticipating the competition. However, in a Vickrey auction, the calculus changes. If you bid below your true valuation, say $90, you risk losing the auction to someone with a bid between $90 and $100, even though you would have been willing to pay the higher price. You've essentially denied yourself a potentially profitable transaction. Conversely, if you bid above your true valuation, say $110, you risk winning the auction and paying the second highest bid, which could be anywhere between $100 and $110. In that case, you're paying more than the item is actually worth to you, a distinct disadvantage. The optimal strategy, therefore, is to bid your true valuation. Bidding truthfully becomes a dominant strategy, meaning it's the best strategy regardless of what other bidders do. This remarkable property is the cornerstone of the Vickrey auction's appeal. The auction, in a sense, guides the participants toward honesty. Each individual, acting in their own self-interest, contributes to a more efficient allocation of resources. The classical economist, observing this equilibrium, finds great satisfaction. The auction mechanism reveals private information, allowing the item to flow to the bidder who values it most highly. This promotes allocative efficiency, a desirable outcome from a societal perspective. There is no incentive for strategic misrepresentation of preferences, leading to a more transparent and predictable outcome. However, like any system, the Vickrey auction is not without its limitations. The policymaker might worry about collusion. If bidders coordinate their bids, they could artificially suppress the second highest bid, thereby reducing the seller's revenue. Imagine, for instance, two bidders agreeing that one will submit a very low bid, effectively ensuring the other wins at a significantly reduced price. Such collusion is a potential vulnerability that must be considered. Furthermore, the Vickrey auction's revenue performance is often lower compared to other auction formats, particularly when there are only a few bidders. The item is allocated efficiently, but the seller might not extract as much surplus as they could under a first-price sealed bid auction, especially if bidders are risk-averse. This creates a trade-off between efficiency and revenue, a common dilemma in the design of economic mechanisms. Despite these considerations, the Vickrey auction holds a significant place in auction theory. Its simplicity and its property of truthful bidding make it a valuable tool for understanding the fundamental principles of mechanism design. It serves as a benchmark against which other, more complex auctions can be evaluated. We've navigated the relatively still waters of truthful bidding. But what happens when we introduce dynamic elements, where bidders can observe each other's actions and revise their strategies in real time? How does the flow of information impact the final outcome? We'll explore these questions as we delve into the realm of open auctions, where the auctioneer's gavel orchestrates a more visible and immediate drama. Until then, good night. Chapter 12. All-pay auctions. High stakes and intense competition. Previously, we explored the intricacies of first-price and second-price auctions, observing how bidders calibrate their strategies in anticipation of winning and often overpaying for the coveted prize. Now, let us turn our gaze to a more peculiar and perhaps unsettling auction format. The all-pay auction. Imagine a contest where every participant, regardless of success or failure, must relinquish their bid. It's a system of inherent loss, where only one emerges victorious, and all others are left only with the sting of expenditure. Think of it as a system where even the most astute participant may find themselves caught in a cycle of escalating commitment, a cascade effect that can be both fascinating and economically treacherous. The foundational characteristic of the all-pay auction is, quite simply, that all bidders pay, regardless of whether they win the item being auctioned. This seemingly minor difference from the auction formats we've seen before radically alters the strategic landscape. The risk profile shifts dramatically, and bidders must now consider not only the probability of winning, but also the certainty of loss. This single adjustment throws the expected profit calculation into a state of disarray. Consider, for instance, a lobbying contest. Multiple entities vying for a single, decisive policy change. Each firm pours resources into swaying the legislature, hiring lobbyists, running advertising campaigns, and perhaps even contributing to political campaigns. Only one group secures the policy they desire. However, all the firms, regardless of their success, have incurred significant costs. The resources are expended, and the bidders are left to count the cost of their failed effort. The all-pay auction finds frequent, and often unintentional, parallels in research and development races. Multiple firms compete to develop a groundbreaking technology, investing heavily in research, prototypes, and testing. Only one firm ultimately patents the innovation and brings it to market successfully. But all firms have sunk costs into their respective research programs. These sunk costs represent the all-pay component. It's a brutal realization that innovation can involve significant waste, even for society as a whole. So, what kind of equilibrium arises in an all-pay auction? Unlike our earlier discussions of strategic bidding, where shading one's bid strategically was paramount, in an all-pay auction, the optimal strategy often involves a degree of randomization. Bidders introduce an element of unpredictability into their bids, blurring the lines of the strategy and keeping their opponents guessing. This stochastic element acts as a stabilizing force, preventing any single bidder from seizing a dominant position. The classical economist, a figure of rational calculation, would immediately point out that, on average, in a symmetric, complete information, all-pay auction, the total expected revenue accruing to the auctioneer, or the seller, often exceeds the value of the item being auctioned. Think about that for a moment. The combined bids from all participants regularly surpass the item's actual worth. This seemingly paradoxical result arises from the competitive pressure and the bidder's aversion to being perceived as giving up. The fear of missing out drives up bids beyond rational levels. This overbidding tendency has crucial implications for efficiency. The policymaker must carefully consider whether to implement all-pay auction mechanisms. While they can generate substantial revenue, they also incentivize potentially wasteful expenditures. Resources that could have been allocated to more productive endeavors are instead consumed in the competitive bidding process. It is a balancing act, a delicate trade-off between revenue generation and resource allocation. One must also consider the psychological dimensions at play. The sunk cost fallacy, the tendency to continue investing in a failing project to avoid acknowledging past losses, can exert a powerful influence on bidders in all-pay auctions. The more a bidder has already invested, the more difficult it becomes to withdraw from the competition, even if the odds of winning diminish substantially. The all-pay auction provides fertile ground for cognitive biases, blurring the line between rational calculation and emotional response. As we contemplate the implications of all-pay auctions, one crucial question lingers. What happens when the bidders are not identical? When asymmetries of information or access to resources arise, the dynamics of the auction shift in subtle, yet profound, ways. How does the introduction of asymmetry alter bidding strategies? And what are the implications for revenue and efficiency? This is where our journey will take us next. Chapter 13. Revenue Equivalence Theorem. A comparative analysis of auction formats. Good evening. We've spent the last few sessions meticulously building our understanding of auction mechanisms, exploring the nuanced dance between bidders, information, and strategic choices. Tonight, we arrive at a rather elegant and powerful concept, the revenue equivalence theorem. Think of it as a unifying principle, a bridge connecting seemingly disparate auction formats, revealing a hidden harmony in their revenue-generating potential. At its heart, the revenue equivalence theorem states, under certain specific conditions, different auction formats, namely, the English auction, the Dutch auction, the first price sealed bid auction, and the second price sealed bid auction, will yield the same expected revenue for the seller. It's a bold assertion, and like any theorem, it rests upon certain crucial assumptions. These assumptions are the bedrock upon which this equivalence is built. Firstly, we assume risk neutrality. This means bidders are indifferent between a gamble and receiving its expected value with certainty. They care only about maximizing their expected payoff, neither averse to nor seeking out risk. Secondly, we assume that bidders are independent and possess private values for the item being auctioned. This private value condition means that each bidder's valuation is independent of the valuations of other bidders. They know their own willingness to pay, and learning the valuations of others doesn't change their own personal assessment. Thirdly, and perhaps most critically, we assume that the auction is symmetric. This signifies that all bidders are ex ante identical. They possess the same probability distribution over possible valuation. Finally, there must be at least two bidders present for the auction to proceed meaningfully. Now, imagine a perfectly balanced scale. On one side sits the English auction, a familiar ascending bid format, where bidders openly compete, raising their offers until only one remains. On the other side resides the Dutch auction, a descending bid format, where the price starts high and gradually falls until a bidder accepts it. Intuitively, these seem quite different. Yet, consider the strategic calculations involved. In the English auction, a bidder continues bidding as long as the current price remains below their private valuation. In the Dutch auction, a bidder must decide when to stop the descent, fearing that another bidder will preempt them. The equilibrium strategies, when properly analyzed, reveal that the expected payment of the winning bidder is the same across these formats. The sealed bid auctions, the first price and second price varieties, add another layer to this intricate design. In the first price, sealed bid auction, bidders submit their bids simultaneously and privately, and the highest bidder wins and pays their bid. The challenge here lies in bidding strategically, shading your bid below your true valuation to maximize expected profit. In contrast, the second price sealed bid auction offers a surprisingly simple and elegant solution. Bidders submit their bids privately, and the highest bidder wins but pays the second highest bid. This format, as the great economist demonstrated, induces bidders to bid their true valuations, leading to an efficient allocation. And remarkably, despite the different bidding dynamics, the expected revenue generated aligns with the English and Dutch auctions under our established assumptions. So, why is this theorem so important? For the policymaker, it offers a powerful tool for evaluating different auction mechanisms. If the assumptions of the revenue equivalence theorem hold reasonably well, then the choice of auction format becomes less critical from a revenue perspective. The focus can then shift to other factors, such as efficiency, ease of implementation, and strategic considerations beyond simple revenue maximization. For example, a simple second price auction might be preferred for its truth-telling incentive, even if it generates roughly the same expected revenue as a more complex format. For the classical economist, it is a beautiful demonstration of how seemingly different economic mechanisms can be shown to be equivalent under appropriate conditions. It highlights the importance of understanding the underlying assumptions and their impact on the outcome. Of course, the real world is rarely so neat. The assumptions of the revenue equivalence theorem are often violated in practice. Bidders may be risk-averse, their valuations may be interdependent, and the auction may not be symmetric. When these assumptions are relaxed, the revenue equivalence breaks down, and the choice of auction format becomes more significant. Indeed, a significant body of research explores the implications of relaxing these assumptions and designing optimal auction mechanisms for specific settings. Tonight, we've traversed the landscape of auction formats, arriving at the revenue equivalence theorem, a unifying principle that reveals a hidden harmony in their revenue-generating potential. But as we venture further, we must ask, what happens when the idyllic conditions of independence and symmetry crumble? How do common values and strategic asymmetries reshape the auction landscape? These are the questions that will guide our exploration next time. Chapter 14, Risk Aversion and its Influence on Bidding Behavior. Good evening. Last time, we discussed the idealized landscape of auction theory, a world populated by perfectly rational agents, each effortlessly calculating expected values and bidding accordingly. Tonight, we gently nudge reality back into the picture, introducing a subtle but profound force: risk aversion. Think of it as the economic equivalent of adding friction to a perfectly smooth surface. It changes everything, even if only slightly. We move from a world of clockwork precision to one of nuanced probabilities and personal preferences. Consider for a moment the standard private value auction. Each bidder holds a unique, secret valuation for the item being offered. In the risk-neutral world we previously inhabited, the optimal strategy in a first-price sealed bid auction was relatively straightforward. Shade your bid below your true valuation, just enough to maximize expected profit, assuming you win. This shading, as we explored, balances the desire to win with the need to secure a sufficient profit margin. But what happens when our bidders become cautious? Risk aversion, at its core, is a preference for certainty. An individual who is risk-averse would rather accept a guaranteed, smaller payout than gamble on a larger, but uncertain, outcome. This aversion stems from the diminishing marginal utility of wealth. The first dollar you earn provides far more satisfaction than the million. The impact of this on bidding behavior is both subtle and pervasive. Imagine two bidders, both valuing an antique at $100. The classical economist, perfectly risk-neutral, might bid $80, calculating that this bid maximizes their expected profit. The risk-averse bidder, however, faces a different calculus. The possibility of winning at $80 and realizing a profit of $20 is appealing, but the prospect of losing and gaining nothing weighs more heavily. They might therefore bid $85 or even $90. The incremental increase in the probability of winning, fueled by their aversion to risk, outweighs the reduced profit margin, at least up to a certain point. This increased bidding, driven by risk aversion, has profound consequences for the auctioneer. In essence, risk aversion leads to higher expected revenue. Bidders, in their desire to avoid the disappointment of losing, are willing to pay more than they would if they were indifferent to risk. The higher the degree of risk aversion across the pool of bidders, the greater the potential revenue uplift for the seller. However, there's a trade-off. While risk aversion can boost revenue, it can also distort efficiency. Efficiency, in auction theory, is typically defined as allocating the item to the bidder who values it the most. In a perfectly efficient auction, the bidder with the highest private value wins, regardless of risk preferences. Risk aversion can disrupt this ideal. The risk-averse bidder, willing to overbid to ensure a win, might outbid the more enthusiastic bidder with a higher true valuation, but who is less concerned about risk. Consider the policymaker, tasked with designing an auction for a public resource, such as spectrum rights. If the goal is purely revenue maximization, fostering an environment where risk aversion is prevalent might seem advantageous. However, if the primary objective is to allocate the resource to the firm that can use it most effectively, the distorting effects of risk aversion become a serious concern. The policymaker might consider strategies to mitigate these effects, such as providing more information to bidders, thereby reducing uncertainty and lessening the impact of risk aversion on bidding behavior. This might involve sharing pre-auction reports or allowing potential bidders to visit the site ahead of auction day. We find ourselves navigating a delicate balancing act. The auctioneer, in seeking to maximize revenue, benefits from the risk aversion of the bidders. However, the policymaker, striving for allocative efficiency, must consider the potential distortions introduced by the same aversion. The optimal auction design, therefore, often involves a careful compromise, weighing the benefits of increased revenue against the potential costs to efficiency. And it is a puzzle that is not always solved. The influence of risk aversion on bidding behavior underscores the importance of understanding the psychological forces at play in auction markets. We move further from the neat abstractions of classical economic theory and closer to the messy, fascinating reality of human decision-making under uncertainty. This has taken us far from the opening bell. Now, what happens when the bidders do not have individual valuations for items? What happens when their values are somehow connected? We shall ponder that as we move forward. Good night. Chapter 15. Information Asymmetry. Leveling the playing field. Having navigated the labyrinthine corridors of moral hazard and adverse selection, our journey now brings us to a fascinating intersection of economic theory and practical application: the world of auctions. Auctions, at their heart, represent a mechanism for price discovery, a way to surface the hidden valuations individuals hold for a particular item or service. But, like any mechanism reliant on human behavior, they are susceptible to the distortions caused by information asymmetry. Today, we will explore auction formats, analyze their revenue-generating capabilities, and consider their overall efficiency, all through the lens of leveling the playing field, or at least understanding the tilt. Imagine, if you will, a grand estate sale. The items are varied, the potential buyers numerous, and the air thick with the unspoken question: what's this really worth to me? This scene, replicated across countless markets daily, highlights the fundamental problem auctions address: how to allocate resources when valuations are private and dispersed. The solution, as with many economic problems, lies in the design of the game itself. Let's begin with the foundational formats. The English auction, or ascending bid auction, is perhaps the most familiar. Bidders openly compete, raising their bids until only one remains. Its intuitive nature makes it readily accessible. The Dutch auction, conversely, starts with a high price that steadily declines until a bidder claims the item. Think of selling cut flowers at the market. The price ticks down until someone calls mine. The sealed bid first price auction, as the name suggests, requires each bidder to submit a single, secret bid. The highest bidder wins and pays their bid. Lastly, the sealed bid second price auction also uses sealed bids, but the winner pays the second highest bid. This subtle shift has profound implications for bidding strategy. The revenue generated by these various formats isn't a random occurrence. It's the result of strategic interplay, a delicate dance between valuation, risk aversion, and expectations. The revenue equivalence theorem, a cornerstone of auction theory, suggests that under certain conditions, specifically risk neutrality and independent private values, these different auction formats should, on average, yield the same revenue for the seller. The implication is profound. The form of the auction should matter. However, in the real world, these conditions rarely hold perfectly. Risk aversion, for instance, can lead bidders to bid more aggressively in sealed bid first price auctions to increase their chances of winning. Common values, where bidders share a common true value for the item, also disrupt revenue equivalence. The winner's curse looms large here. The highest bidder, who is most optimistic about the value, may end up overpaying. To counter this, bidders often shade their bids downward. Efficiency in an auction context refers to the allocation of the item to the bidder who values it most highly. A perfectly efficient auction would consistently achieve this outcome. However, information asymmetry can throw a wrench in the works. If one bidder possesses superior information about the item's true value, they can exploit this advantage. Imagine an art auction where one bidder is an expert restorer and knows the painting is a masterpiece hidden under layers of grime. This knowledge asymmetry allows them to bid more strategically and potentially outcompete less informed bidders, even if another bidder would value the cleaned masterpiece more highly. The Vickrey auction, with its second price rule, encourages truthful bidding because bidders are incentivized to bid their true valuation without fear of overpaying significantly. This feature often leads to higher efficiency compared to the first price auction. What, then, is the role of the policymaker in this complex landscape? Their role is to ensure a fair and transparent auction process, mitigating the adverse effects of information asymmetry. This can involve measures such as providing access to information about the item being auctioned, regulating bidding practices to prevent collusion, and ensuring a level playing field for all participants. The aim is not necessarily to maximize revenue for the seller, but to ensure the item goes to the party that values it the most, thereby maximizing societal welfare. Remember, auction design impacts resource allocation, influencing everything from spectrum rights for telecommunications to government bonds. The classical economist, observing the intricacies of auction theory, might argue that market forces will eventually correct for informational imbalances. However, the policymaker, aware of the potential for exploitation and inefficiency, takes a more proactive stance, understanding that well-designed auctions, coupled with appropriate regulation, can be powerful tools for achieving optimal resource allocation. As we move forward, consider this. If auctions represent a microcosm of market dynamics, what other seemingly disparate areas of economics could benefit from a similar analysis of informational flows and strategic behavior? And, crucially, how can we ensure that the pursuit of individual gain aligns with the collective good? Chapter 16. Collusion in Auctions. Detection and Prevention. Last time, we explored the fascinating landscape of auction design, focusing on how different formats, English, Dutch, sealed bid, impact revenue and efficiency. Now, let's turn our attention to a particularly thorny issue: collusion. It's a subtle force that can warp the carefully constructed incentives of an auction, diverting wealth away from the seller and undermining the very purpose of competitive bidding. Think of it as introducing a hidden weight to one side of a scale, throwing the system out of balance. Collusion, in essence, is an agreement between bidders to suppress competition. They might agree to take turns winning, or to divide the market geographically, or simply to refrain from bidding aggressively against each other. The motivation is clear: to acquire the good or service being auctioned at a lower price than would prevail in a truly competitive environment. It's a form of economic sabotage, if you will. Detecting collusion isn't easy. It rarely manifests as a signed contract or a public announcement. Instead, it often takes the form of subtle patterns in bidding behavior. One telltale sign is unexpectedly low bid variance. In a competitive auction, we would expect bidders to have different valuations, and therefore to submit a range of bids. If bids are clustered closely together, especially across multiple auctions, it raises suspicion. Think of it as finding a set of fingerprints that are unusually similar. It suggests a common origin. Another indicator is bid rotation. If a small group of bidders consistently takes turns winning auctions, even when there's no obvious reason why their valuations should fluctuate in that manner, it could be evidence of a collusive agreement. Imagine a dance where the same partners keep reappearing in a predetermined sequence. The unnatural rhythm attracts attention. Furthermore, the sudden withdrawal of bidders can also be a red flag. If a bidder consistently participates in auctions but suddenly stops bidding, particularly after a communication with a competitor, it could indicate that they've been bought off or intimidated into withdrawing from the competition. It's as if a vital gear suddenly stops turning in the machinery of the auction. Preventing collusion is arguably even more challenging than detecting it. It requires a multi-pronged approach. The policymaker, aware of the potential for anti-competitive behavior, often introduces measures designed to make collusion more difficult and less attractive. One common strategy is to increase transparency. By making bid histories public, at least after the auction is concluded, it becomes easier to identify suspicious patterns. This acts as a deterrent, forcing colluders to be more careful and making their agreements more difficult to enforce. Another approach is to increase the number of bidders. The more participants in an auction, the harder it becomes to coordinate a collusive agreement. The classical economist might advocate for actively seeking out new potential bidders, perhaps by lowering barriers to entry or by promoting the auction more widely. It's like diluting a concentrated solution. The strength of the collusive agreement is diminished by the presence of additional actors. Furthermore, employing amnesty programs can be effective. These programs offer leniency to bidders who come forward and report collusive behavior. This can create a prisoner's dilemma situation, where each bidder has an incentive to betray their co-conspirators in order to avoid being punished themselves. It's a way of turning the colluders against each other, disrupting their fragile alliance. Finally, sophisticated auction design can also play a role in preventing collusion. For example, some auction formats are inherently less susceptible to collusion than others. A format that conceals information about other bidders' valuations can make it more difficult to coordinate a collusive agreement. It's like conducting the orchestra in the dark, making it harder for the musicians to synchronize. However, even with these measures in place, collusion remains a persistent threat. It's a dynamic process, constantly evolving as bidders seek new ways to circumvent the rules. The challenge for policymakers and auction designers is to stay one step ahead, to anticipate these new strategies, and to develop countermeasures that maintain the integrity of the auction process. It's a constant game of cat and mouse, a continuous effort to preserve the delicate balance of the market. And as we contemplate the challenges of preserving auction integrity, a question lingers. How will the increasing sophistication of AI bidding algorithms alter the landscape of collusion? Will they become new tools for anti-competitive behavior, or will they help us detect and prevent it more effectively? We'll explore this in the next chapter. Good night. Chapter 17. Bidding Rings. The Dark Side of Group Dynamics. We've explored the vibrant landscape of auction design, the strategic dance of bidders seeking to maximize their gains within predefined rules. We've seen how different auction formats, English, Dutch, sealed bid, yield varied revenues and efficiencies, influenced by factors like risk aversion and the number of participants. But now, let us descend into a murkier realm, a shadowy corner of auction theory, where individual strategies intertwine to form something less than honest. We turn our attention to bidding rings. Consider, for a moment, the delicate equilibrium that underpins a well-functioning auction. Each participant, acting in their self-interest, contributes to a price discovery mechanism that ideally reflects the true value of the item being sold. This is the ideal, the theoretical North Star guiding our understanding. But what happens when these individual self-interests coalesce into a coordinated effort, a conspiracy to manipulate the very fabric of the auction? This is the essence of a bidding ring. A bidding ring, in its simplest form, is a collusive agreement among bidders. Rather than competing against each other, they agree to suppress their bids, allowing one designated member of the ring to secure the item at a lower price than it would otherwise fetch. Afterwards, the ring members may hold a private, sealed bid auction amongst themselves to determine the ultimate owner, sharing the spoils of their coordinated deceit. The original seller, of course, remains blissfully unaware of the true value that has been siphoned away. The formation of a bidding ring often hinges on a few key elements. First, and perhaps most crucially, is trust. Successfully coordinating such a scheme requires a significant degree of confidence among the participants. They must trust that their fellow conspirators will uphold the agreement, refrain from bidding against the designated member, and accurately report their private valuations during the subsequent internal auction. The shadow of potential betrayal constantly looms over the operation. Secondly, the nature of the auctioned good plays a vital role. Items that are difficult to value, perhaps due to their unique characteristics or limited market information, are particularly susceptible to bidding ring activity. The uncertainty allows the ring to more effectively suppress prices, as individual bidders are less confident in their own valuations, and thus more easily swayed by the artificially low bids of the colluding group. Think of antique furniture, rare books, or even certain types of real estate. The economic consequences of bidding rings are far-reaching. For the seller, the immediate impact is a reduction in revenue. The item is sold for less than its true market value, representing a direct loss of profit. Furthermore, the presence of bidding rings can distort the auction process, discouraging legitimate bidders from participating. If potential buyers perceive that the auction is rigged, they may choose to abstain, further depressing prices and undermining the efficiency of the market. The policymaker, tasked with ensuring fair competition, faces a formidable challenge in combating bidding rings. Detecting such collusion is notoriously difficult, as the agreements are often clandestine, and leave little tangible evidence. However, subtle clues, such as unusually low bidding activity or consistent patterns of abstention among certain bidders, may raise suspicion. Surveillance of communication patterns, combined with economic analysis of bidding data, can sometimes reveal the telltale signs of a coordinated conspiracy. Legal frameworks designed to prohibit anti-competitive behavior, such as antitrust laws, provide the primary tools for prosecuting bidding rings. However, the burden of proof is often high, requiring substantial evidence of a coordinated agreement. The complexities of auction theory and the nuances of bidding strategies can make it challenging to definitively establish that collusion has occurred. Penalties for engaging in bidding ring activity can range from fines to imprisonment, serving as a deterrent to potential conspirators. However, the lure of illicit profits often proves too strong for some. The fight against bidding rings is a constant balancing act, a struggle to maintain the integrity of the auction process while respecting the rights of individual bidders. The flow of information, the transparency of auction rules, and the vigilance of market participants all play a crucial role in preventing this dark side of group dynamics from undermining the efficiency and fairness of the market. But as the digital age dawns ever brighter on the economic world, what new forms of collusion will emerge from the digital shadows? What new complexities will algorithmic bidding introduce into this age-old struggle for fair prices? Chapter 18. Auction Design. Optimizing for revenue and efficiency. Welcome, dear listeners. As the embers of thought begin to glow, we turn our attention tonight to a realm where value meets competition, the subtle art and science of auction design. Recall our earlier explorations of market structures, of perfect competition and its imperfect brethren. Auctions in many ways represent a microcosm of these dynamics, a focused lens through which we can observe the interplay of supply, demand, and strategic behavior. Tonight, we'll explore the nuances of auction formats, their revenue implications, and their overall efficiency in allocating resources. The basic premise of an auction is elegantly simple: to allocate a good or service to the bidder who values it most highly. But beneath this simplicity lies a complex web of strategic considerations, influenced by the rules of the auction itself. Let's begin by considering the primary formats, each with its unique characteristics and implications. First, we have the English auction, also known as the ascending bid auction. This is the format most familiar to us, often seen in televised art sales or online marketplaces. Bidders openly announce increasing bids, and the item is sold to the highest bidder. It's a relatively transparent process, allowing bidders to observe the valuations of others and adjust their own strategies accordingly. Then there's the Dutch auction, or descending bid auction. In this format, the auctioneer starts with a high price, gradually lowering it until a bidder accepts the current price. It's a faster-paced process than the English auction, often used for perishable goods or securities where speed is of the essence. The sealed bid auctions offer a different dynamic altogether. In a first-price sealed bid auction, each bidder submits a single secret bid, and the highest bidder wins, paying the price they bid. This format encourages bidders to bid conservatively, trying to balance the desire to win with the risk of overpaying. A variation on this theme is the second-price sealed bid auction, also known as the Vickrey auction. Again, bidders submit sealed bids, but the winner pays the second highest bid. This seemingly subtle change has profound consequences. The classical economist, many years ago, demonstrated that, under certain conditions, bidding one's true valuation becomes a dominant strategy in a Vickrey auction. That is, regardless of what other bidders do, a bidder is always better off bidding their true value. Now, let us consider the revenue implications of these different auction formats. Intuitively, we might expect that all auction formats would generate roughly the same revenue in the long run. This notion is captured by the revenue equivalence theorem, which, under idealized conditions, predicts that certain auction formats, the English, Dutch, first price sealed bid, and second price sealed bid, will yield the same expected revenue for the seller. The conditions required for this theorem to hold are quite stringent, including risk neutrality among bidders and independent private values. In reality, these conditions are rarely fully met. Bidders may be risk-averse, and their valuations may be correlated. When these assumptions are relaxed, the revenue ranking of the auction formats can change. For example, with risk-averse bidders, the first price, sealed bid auction, tends to generate higher revenue than the English auction, as bidders are willing to bid more aggressively to secure the win. Beyond revenue, efficiency is a crucial consideration. An efficient auction allocates the item to the bidder who values it most highly. The English and second price sealed bid auctions, under the conditions that lead to truthful revelation of value, are generally considered to be efficient. The Dutch and first price sealed bid auctions, on the other hand, can be less efficient, as strategic bidding may lead to the item being allocated to someone other than the highest valuing bidder. Auction design is not merely an academic exercise. It has real-world implications for resource allocation in a variety of contexts. The policymaker might use auctions to allocate radio spectrum licenses, government contracts, or even carbon emission permits. The careful design of these auctions can have a significant impact on the efficiency of these markets and the overall welfare of society. The study of auctions is, ultimately, a study of information and incentives. How do different auction formats affect the information available to bidders? How do they incentivize bidders to reveal their true valuations? These are the questions that drive research in this field, and the answers can have profound consequences for the way we allocate scarce resources. And so, as we reach the end of our exploration for tonight, we are left with a question. As technologies evolve and data becomes ever more accessible, how will new forms of dynamic pricing, going beyond simple auctions, reshape the landscape of resource allocation in the future? Ponder that, and let it guide you into a restful sleep. Reserve prices. Setting the floor for value. Good evening. In our previous exploration, we considered the fascinating dynamics of bidder behavior, the subtle dance of information asymmetry, and how rational actors attempt to outmaneuver one another within the auction arena. Tonight, we delve into a related yet distinct concept, the reserve price. Imagine it as the foundation upon which the edifice of auction value is built, a crucial element influencing both revenue and efficiency. Think of an auctioneer as a careful gardener, nurturing a delicate flower. The reserve price is akin to providing fertile soil, ensuring the blossom, or the final selling price, has a firm base from which to flourish. It represents the minimum acceptable bid, the threshold below which the seller is unwilling to part with their valuable item. This floor price isn't arbitrary. It's often rooted in the seller's estimation of the item's intrinsic worth, the cost of acquiring it, or perhaps a strategic assessment of potential future value. The impact of the reserve price is multifaceted. On one hand, it safeguards the seller from accepting a price that is demonstrably below their own valuation. This protection is particularly vital in scenarios where information is incomplete, or where bidders may collude to suppress prices. The reserve price acts as a bulwark against such opportunistic behavior, ensuring the seller receives at least a fair return. Think of it as a balancing force, preventing the scale of value from tipping too heavily in the buyer's favor. However, the influence of the reserve price isn't without its complexities. Setting it too high can inadvertently discourage participation. Potential bidders, perceiving the minimum price as unattainable or unreasonable, may simply opt out of the auction altogether. This reduction in competition can ironically lead to a lower final selling price, or even a failed auction entirely. The gardener, in their zeal to protect the soil, might inadvertently block the sunlight the flower needs to bloom. The optimal reserve price, therefore, is a delicate balancing act. The classical economists, in their idealized models, might suggest setting the reserve price just below the second highest private valuation, a strategy designed to maximize revenue extraction. However, the real world is rarely so neat. Estimating these valuations with perfect accuracy is an impossible task. The policymaker, mindful of the realities of incomplete information, might advocate for a more conservative approach, favoring a reserve price that guarantees a reasonable return while still encouraging broad participation. Consider the different auction formats we've discussed. In a sealed bid auction, the reserve price acts as a silent sentinel, filtering out any bids that fall short of the mark. In an ascending price auction, it serves as the starting point, the initial stake in the ground from which the bidding war commences. Its effect is subtly different in each context, shaping the strategic landscape and influencing the ultimate outcome. The question of efficiency is also intimately linked to the reserve price. A poorly set reserve can lead to allocated inefficiency, situations where the item doesn't end up in the hands of the bidder who values it most highly. If the highest valuing bidder is deterred by an excessively high reserve, the item might be sold to someone with a lower valuation, diminishing overall societal welfare. This creates ripples in the economic pond, disturbing the natural flow of resources. In essence, the reserve price represents a crucial lever in the hands of the seller, a mechanism for influencing both revenue and efficiency. But like any powerful tool, it must be wielded with care and precision. Misjudging its placement can lead to unintended consequences, disrupting the delicate equilibrium of the auction process. It is a testament to the subtle artistry of economic strategy, a reminder that seemingly simple decisions can have profound implications. As we drift towards sleep, consider this. If the reserve price is the foundation, what are the architectural plans that guide the auctioneer in creating a truly valuable structure? What unseen blueprints shape the final form and function of the auction mechanism? We will explore this intriguing question in our next session. Good night. Chapter 20. Entry fees and their impact on participation. Last time, we explored the nuances of network effects, how the value of a good or service increases with the number of users. Now, let's consider another fascinating intersection of economic theory and practical application. Auctions, specifically focusing on entry fees and their subtle impact on who participates, and ultimately, the overall efficiency of the auction itself. Think of it as a further refinement, a polishing of the lens through which we view market mechanisms. Auctions, in their simplest form, are mechanisms for allocating goods or services where potential buyers submit bids. The rules governing these bids, the auction format, are remarkably diverse. The English auction, or ascending bid auction, is perhaps the most familiar, with bids increasing until only one bidder remains. Then there's the Dutch auction, a descending bid format where the price drops until a buyer claims the item. Sealed bid auctions, where bids are submitted privately and simultaneously, further complicate the landscape, giving rise to first price and second price variations. Each format possesses its own inherent strategic considerations, influencing how bidders behave. Now, let us consider revenue. A central question is this: which auction format generates the most revenue for the seller? The answer, unsurprisingly, is complex and dependent on several factors, notably the bidder's risk aversion and their private valuations of the item. The celebrated revenue equivalence theorem, under certain restrictive conditions, posits that several common auction formats will yield the same expected revenue. However, these conditions rarely hold perfectly in the real world. Risk aversion, for example, can lead bidders in a first-price sealed bid auction to shade their bids lower than their true valuation, seeking to increase their chances of winning, albeit at a potentially lower profit. This in turn affects the seller's expected revenue. The second-price sealed bid auction, by virtue of its dominant strategy of bidding one's true valuation, can mitigate some of these effects. Efficiency, in the context of auctions, refers to the degree to which the item ends up in the hands of the bidder who values it most highly. An efficient auction maximizes societal welfare by allocating resources to their most productive use. While revenue generation is a primary concern for the seller, an inefficient auction can have broader economic repercussions. Strategic bidding, information asymmetry, and collusion can all undermine the efficiency of the auction process. This brings us to the crux of our discussion: entry fees. An entry fee is a sum of money that potential bidders must pay to participate in the auction. Why might one impose such a fee? The reasons are multifaceted. First, it serves as a signal of serious intent. By requiring bidders to put skin in the game, the seller can filter out those who are merely casually interested, focusing the auction on genuinely motivated buyers. This can reduce the computational burden of managing numerous bids and streamline the process. However, entry fees introduce a trade-off. While they deter frivolous participation, they also potentially exclude bidders with lower, yet still positive, valuations. This can lead to a selection bias, where the auction is dominated by bidders with deep pockets, regardless of whether they are truly the highest valuers of the item. The classical economist might argue that this distortion diminishes the efficiency of the auction, potentially allocating the item to someone who values it less than someone who was priced out by the entry fee. The policymaker, therefore, faces a delicate balancing act. Setting the entry fee too high risks excluding valuable participants, reducing competition and potentially lowering revenue. Setting it too low fails to adequately filter out unserious bidders, adding complexity and potentially undermining the efficiency of the allocation. The optimal entry fee depends critically on the distribution of bidder valuations and the overall goals of the auction. So, we see that even a seemingly simple mechanism like an entry fee can have profound and multifaceted effects on the dynamics of an auction. It is a lever that, when pulled in just the right way, can improve the process, but when misapplied, can distort it significantly. What happens, however, when we consider the repeated nature of many auctions? How does experience and learning shape bidding behavior over time, and how does this interact with the presence of entry fees? This, perhaps, is a question for our next exploration. Chapter 21. The role of information in auction outcomes. Last time, we explored the spectrum of auction formats, each a subtly different dance between supply and demand. Now, let us consider the crucial ingredient that flavors this dance: information. It is the subtle spice that can transform a seemingly simple auction into a complex landscape of strategy and expectation. The flow of information, its completeness or lack thereof, profoundly shapes bidding strategies, influences the revenues generated, and ultimately determines the efficiency of the outcome. Think of it as the wind, shaping the sails of each bidder, guiding their course toward or away from the prize. Let's begin by considering the ideal, yet often unattainable, world of perfect information. In this theoretical Eden, every bidder knows the true value of the item being auctioned. They are fully aware of the valuations held by all other participants. The air is crystal clear, and there are no shadows of uncertainty. In such a scenario, the outcome, at least in a standard auction format like the English or ascending bid auction, is almost preordained. The bidder with the highest valuation will win, paying a price just slightly above the second highest valuation. The auction efficiently allocates the item to the individual who values it most. The revenue generated is predictable, close to the second highest valuation. It's a beautiful, elegant equilibrium, a perfectly balanced system. But alas, the real world is rarely so transparent. Information is almost always incomplete and often asymmetric. Asymmetric information, where some bidders possess more or better information than others, throws a wrench into the perfectly oiled machine. This creates fertile ground for strategic bidding, risk aversion, and the possibility of inefficient outcomes. Imagine a landscape where some bidders have telescopes, peering into the distance with clarity, while others are stumbling in the fog. Consider, for instance, the scenario where bidders are uncertain about the true value of the item being auctioned. This is common in auctions for oil leases or mineral rights. Each bidder conducts their own investigations, analyzes geological surveys, and forms an estimate of the potential yield. These estimates are likely to be correlated. Everyone is drawing information from roughly the same source. However, if a bidder wins, it implies that their estimate was the highest. This introduces a phenomenon known as the winner's curse. The classical economist, ever cautious, would emphasize this. The winner may have overestimated the value, and their winnings may be less than anticipated or even non-existent. The strategic response to the winner's curse is to bid conservatively, shading your bid below your private estimate of the value. The more uncertain you are about the true value, and the more bidders there are, the greater the degree of shading required. This risk aversion depresses auction revenues, as bidders are unwilling to push the price as high as they would if they possessed perfect information. The auction format itself can mitigate or exacerbate the effects of asymmetric information. Sealed bid auctions, such as the first price sealed bid auction, provide less information during the bidding process. Bidders must rely solely on their own private information and their expectations about the behavior of others. Conversely, open auctions, like the English auction, allow bidders to observe the bids of others, providing at least some glimpse into the valuations held by their competitors. This information revelation can help reduce uncertainty and lead to more efficient outcomes, though it also opens the door to strategic signaling and manipulation. The policymaker must consider these informational dynamics when designing auctions. Carefully structuring the auction to encourage information sharing and minimize asymmetric information can improve efficiency and increase revenue. This might involve providing bidders with access to independent valuations or employing auction formats that are less susceptible to the winner's curse. The goal is to create a level playing field where bidders can compete fairly and efficiently. The role of information in auctions is a complex and fascinating field, one where the interplay of strategy, risk aversion, and market design profoundly influences outcomes. We have only scratched the surface of this intricate dance. As we prepare to move forward, perhaps the most compelling question that remains is this: how can we design auction mechanisms that not only generate revenue, but also foster trust and encourage the efficient allocation of resources in a world perpetually veiled in uncertainty? We will ponder that as we move forward to our next topic of consideration: signaling in auctions. Sending and interpreting messages, we've navigated the core structures of auction formats, considered the dance of revenue generation, and assessed the silent efficiency of different approaches. Now we turn our attention to a more nuanced aspect: the intentional or unintentional communication embedded within the bidding process itself. We are embarking upon the realm of signaling in auctions, a delicate interplay of sending and interpreting messages. Auctions, you see, are rarely conducted in a vacuum of perfect information. Bidders possess varying degrees of private knowledge about the item's value, and they simultaneously observe the actions of their competitors. This creates fertile ground for strategic messaging, for attempts to influence beliefs and, ultimately, outcomes. Think of it as a complex ecosystem where each bid not only represents a valuation, but also a potential statement. Consider the English auction, that seemingly straightforward ascending bid format. The classical economist might naively assume that each incremental bid simply reveals a bidder's willingness to pay. However, in reality, early aggression, a rapid escalation of bids, can serve as a potent signal. It might convey to other bidders a perception that the aggressor possesses superior information, a higher valuation, or a particularly strong desire for the item. Such a display can intimidate weaker bidders, discouraging them from participating further. This, of course, is a calculated risk. An overly aggressive signal could backfire, prompting others to believe the item is overvalued, and causing them to withdraw, leaving the signaler to win at a potentially inflated price. In sealed bid auctions, the nature of signaling becomes even more intricate. Since bids are submitted privately and simultaneously, direct communication is impossible. Yet, the chosen bidding strategy itself acts as a signal. For instance, a very low bid in a first price, sealed bid auction might suggest a lack of confidence in the item's value, or an attempt to discourage others from bidding aggressively. Conversely, a very high bid, while risky, could be interpreted as a sign of overwhelming conviction, potentially intimidating competitors and deterring them from submitting competitive bids. This delicate balancing act, this strategic dance around perceived value, forms the heart of signaling. The challenge, of course, lies in interpreting these signals correctly. The policymaker, concerned with maximizing revenue or promoting efficient allocation, must be wary of manipulative signaling tactics. A particularly sophisticated bidder might intentionally send misleading signals to drive down the price, acquiring the item at a bargain. Counteracting such behavior requires a deep understanding of game theory and the potential strategies employed by irrational agents. Furthermore, the effectiveness of signaling depends heavily on the context of the auction. The number of bidders, the degree of information asymmetry, and the perceived credibility of the signal all play crucial roles. In an auction with many bidders and relatively symmetric information, signaling may have little impact, as the sheer weight of numbers mitigates the influence of any single bid. However, in an auction with only a few bidders and significant information disparities, signaling can be a powerful tool. The presence of affiliated values, where one bidder's valuation is correlated with others, further complicates the signaling landscape. In such scenarios, a bid can reveal not only the bidder's private information, but also indirectly signal information about the item's value to other participants. This creates a feedback loop, where bids become both signals and responses to signals, leading to potentially complex and unpredictable outcomes. Understanding the dynamics of signaling in auctions is therefore essential for both bidders and those designing or regulating auction mechanisms. It allows bidders to refine their strategies, anticipate the behavior of their competitors, and ultimately achieve more favorable outcomes. For policymakers, it provides insights into potential sources of inefficiency and opportunities to design auction rules that promote transparency and mitigate manipulative behavior. As we conclude this exploration, we're left with a lingering question. How do these signals change when uncertainty is paramount, and the value of the item is not just numerical, but also tied to intangible qualities like prestige or legacy? How does the message become muddled when the definition of winning becomes subjective? Procurement auctions, reverse bidding and cost reduction. Last time, we explored the fascinating dynamics of supply chains reacting to price signals. Tonight, our journey into the economic landscape brings us to a specific and often overlooked corner: procurement auctions, a world where the buyer, rather than the seller, orchestrates the bidding process. Think of it as a mirror image of what we've seen before, a reverse auction, if you will, designed with the primary objective of cost reduction. The core principle is elegantly simple. A buyer, typically a large corporation or government entity, announces a need, perhaps a contract for road construction, or a large order of computer components. Instead of sellers competing to sell at the highest price, they now compete to bid the lowest price. This reverse bidding structure creates a powerful downward pressure on prices, a phenomenon the policymaker often seeks to harness in public procurement. Several formats exist within this framework. The most common is the English reverse auction, mirroring its forward counterpart. Bidders see the current lowest price and iteratively submit lower bids until the auction closes. This open format encourages competitive pricing, though it can also be susceptible to collusion if bidders are not carefully monitored. Sealed bid reverse auctions, on the other hand, offer a different set of dynamics. Each bidder submits a single, confidential bid. The buyer then selects the lowest bid meeting the specified requirements. This format reduces the risk of collusion, but requires bidders to carefully estimate their costs, as they have only one chance to secure the contract. This presents a strategic challenge: bid too low and risk compromising quality or profitability; bid too high and lose the opportunity entirely. The Dutch reverse auction, a less common variant, begins with a high price that is gradually lowered until a bidder accepts. While rarely used in pure form for procurement, elements of this structure can be found in dynamic pricing strategies, where the buyer tests the market's willingness to supply at different price points. The revenue dynamics of a procurement auction, from the buyer's perspective, are straightforward. The aim is to minimize expenditure. However, the true efficiency lies not just in the price paid, but also in the quality of the good or service procured. The classical economist would remind us that focusing solely on the lowest price can lead to a race to the bottom, where suppliers cut corners, potentially compromising long-term value and creating hidden costs. To mitigate this risk, buyers often employ multi-attribute auctions. These auctions incorporate factors beyond price, such as quality, delivery time, environmental impact, and past performance. Bidders are evaluated not just on their price, but on a weighted score reflecting their overall value proposition. This allows for a more nuanced and holistic assessment, promoting not only cost reduction, but also enhanced quality and sustainability. Consider a government agency procuring renewable energy. A simple reverse auction might favor the provider offering the lowest price per kilowatt hour. However, a multi-attribute auction could also consider the source of the energy, the environmental impact of the generation process, and the provider's reliability in delivering a consistent energy supply. This leads to a more sustainable and responsible outcome, aligning with broader societal goals. The effectiveness of procurement auctions hinges on several factors. First, there must be sufficient competition among suppliers. A monopolistic market undermines the downward pressure on prices. Second, the buyer must clearly define the specifications of the good or service being procured. Ambiguity can lead to misunderstandings and disputes, ultimately negating any cost savings. Third, the buyer must have the capacity to monitor and enforce the contract terms, ensuring that the winning bidder delivers on their promises. Ultimately, procurement auctions represent a powerful tool for cost reduction. Yet, like any economic mechanism, their success depends on careful design and implementation. The challenge lies in balancing the desire for lower prices with the need for quality, sustainability, and long-term value. And as we consider the ebb and flow of these reverse auctions, one question lingers. How do the winning bidders strategize and adapt to maintain profitability in a fiercely competitive landscape? What are the hidden margins and efficiency gains they discover to thrive in the world of the procurement auction? That, perhaps, is a topic for another evening. Online auctions. The rise of eBay, and beyond the hum of servers, the glow of screens. These are the modern marketplaces where auctions now unfold. It wasn't always so. For centuries, auctions were physical affairs, governed by the pace of a gavel and the tangible presence of bidders. But the internet, with its boundless reach, created fertile ground for a new kind of auction, one that democratized access and profoundly reshaped how value is determined and exchanged. Foremost among these digital arenas was eBay, a pioneering platform that, in many ways, defined the landscape of online auctions as we know it. But beyond its specific story, online auctions provide a compelling illustration of auction theory in practice, revealing the intricacies of bidding strategies, the generation of revenue, and the elusive pursuit of economic efficiency. The core of auction theory rests on understanding the various formats. Consider the English auction, the ascending bid format familiar to most. Bidders openly compete, raising their bids incrementally until only one remains, the victor. This format is relatively simple and intuitively appealing, but it can be prone to what economists call the winner's curse, where the winning bidder overestimates the true value of the item and ends up paying more than it's worth. Then there's the Dutch auction, a descending bid format where the auctioneer starts with a high price and gradually lowers it until a bidder accepts. This format favors quick sales, but may not extract the maximum possible revenue. A more sophisticated approach is the sealed bid auction, where bidders submit their bids privately and simultaneously. The highest bidder wins, but the price they pay can vary. In a first price sealed bid auction, the winner pays their own bid, incentivizing bidders to bid conservatively. However, in a second price sealed bid auction, also known as a Vickrey auction, the winner pays the second highest bid. This seemingly counterintuitive format has remarkable properties. It theoretically induces bidders to bid their true value, eliminating the need for strategic maneuver. The policymaker finds this format particularly interesting because of its potential to maximize social welfare by allocating the item to the bidder who values it the most. The revenue generated by different auction formats is a central concern. A classical economist, looking at the theoretical landscape, might ask, which format, under ideal conditions, generates the highest expected revenue? The revenue equivalence theorem suggests that, under certain assumptions, risk neutrality, independent private values, and symmetry among bidders, several seemingly different auction formats, including the English, Dutch, first price sealed bid, and second price sealed bid auctions, will yield the same expected revenue. However, the real world is rarely so neat. Factors like risk aversion, bidder asymmetry, and collusion can significantly impact the outcome. Efficiency, in the context of auctions, refers to whether the item is allocated to the bidder who values it the most. A perfectly efficient auction maximizes social welfare, ensuring that resources are allocated to their most productive use. The second price sealed bid auction, with its incentive for truthful bidding, often approximates efficiency. However, Even the most well-designed auction can be undermined by strategic behavior, information asymmetry, or external factors. Online auctions, while providing a platform for wider participation and increased efficiency, also introduce new challenges. The anonymity afforded by the internet can facilitate fraud and collusion. The sheer volume of transactions necessitates robust mechanisms for trust and reputation management. Furthermore, the dynamic nature of online bidding requires algorithms that can adapt to changing market conditions and optimize revenue. Consider eBay's evolution. Initially, it mirrored the simplicity of a traditional English auction. Over time, however, it incorporated features from other auction formats, such as sealed bid elements and the ability to set reserve prices. These adaptations reflect a constant striving to balance revenue generation, efficiency, and user experience. The ongoing refinement of bidding algorithms and reputation systems demonstrates the dynamic interplay between theory and practice in the realm of online auctions. The story of online auctions is not just a tale of technological innovation. It's a case study in applied economics, revealing the power of auction theory to shape market behavior and allocate resources. As we reflect on the rise of these digital marketplaces, we might ask, what new economic forms will arise from the continued blending of the digital and physical realms, and how will they further challenge our understanding of value and exchange? Game theory and auction strategy. A deep dive, we've explored the complexities of market equilibrium and the dance of supply and demand. Now, let us gently drift into the world of auctions, a fascinating microcosm where individual strategies collide and value is ultimately determined through competitive bidding. Consider it a contained ecosystem of economic decision-making, ripe for analysis through the lens of game theory. Auctions, at their core, are mechanisms for allocating goods or services to the individual who values them most highly, or at least believes they do. But the beauty and the inherent strategic challenge lies in the how, the various auction formats that shape bidding behavior and influence the final outcome. Let's explore these formats, the revenue they generate, and their overall efficiency. Perhaps the most familiar format is the English auction, or ascending bid auction. Think of a classic art auction. Bids rise incrementally until only one bidder remains. Its simplicity is deceptive, masking a subtle strategic interplay. Bidders, in essence, reveal their willingness to pay, incrementally ratcheting up the price until they reach their personal valuation threshold. This format, often considered relatively efficient, tends to allocate the item to the bidder with the highest private value, though the final price may be slightly below that value, extracting consumer surplus. The revelation of information is gradual, allowing bidders to adjust their strategies as the auction progresses. Contrast this with the Dutch auction, or a descending bid auction, sometimes called a reverse auction. Here, the auctioneer starts with a high price, which is then lowered until a bidder accepts it. Think of selling flowers at market, but in hyperdrive. This format, while seemingly straightforward, presents a different strategic landscape. Bidders must balance the desire to secure the item at a low price with the risk of losing out to another quicker bidder. The pressure of time and the lack of information about other bidders' valuations often leads to lower revenues compared to the English auction. Then there's the sealed bid auction, where bidders submit their bids in secret and the highest bidder wins. Within this category, we find two main types: the first price sealed bid auction and the second price sealed bid auction. In the first, the winner pays their own bid. This incentivizes bidders to bid below their true valuation, attempting to secure a bargain. The strategic tension lies in balancing the probability of winning against the potential profit margin. The policymaker worries about collusion here, where bidders cooperate to artificially suppress bids. The second price sealed bid auction, also known as a Vickrey auction, introduces a fascinating twist. The highest bidder wins, but pays only the second highest bid. Counterintuitively, this format encourages bidders to bid their true valuation. Why? Because bidding below your true valuation increases your risk of losing to someone who bids slightly higher, while bidding above your true valuation only increases your risk of overpaying if you win. This dominant strategy property, bidding truthfully, makes the Vickrey auction a benchmark for efficiency, often used as a theoretical yardstick. However, it's also sometimes susceptible to manipulation if the bidders can influence the second highest bid. The classical economist appreciates the theoretical neatness, even if real-world application requires caution. Revenue generation across these formats is a complex matter, influenced by factors such as the number of bidders, the distribution of their valuations, and their risk aversion. Under certain idealized conditions, often termed the revenue equivalence theorem, many different auction formats are predicted to yield the same expected revenue to the seller. However, in practice, deviations from these ideal conditions, such as asymmetric information, bidder collusion, and varying degrees of risk aversion, can lead to significant differences in revenue outcomes. The English auction and the second price sealed bid auction are often found to generate higher revenues than the Dutch auction or the first price sealed bid auction, especially when bidders are relatively risk-averse. Efficiency, in the context of auctions, refers to whether the item is allocated to the bidder who values it most highly. The English auction and the Vickrey auction, due to their incentive-compatible mechanisms, tend to be more efficient than the Dutch auction or the first price sealed bid auction. However, even in these more efficient formats, inefficiencies can arise due to factors such as bidder mistakes, informational asymmetries, and the presence of affiliated values, where a bidder's valuation is influenced by the information held by other bidders. These elements introduce layers of complexity that require careful consideration when designing and analyzing auction mechanisms. As we conclude this exploration of auction formats and strategies, consider the broader implications. Auctions are not merely isolated events. They are powerful mechanisms for price discovery, resource allocation, and information aggregation. Their design can have profound consequences for economic efficiency and social welfare. Consider, then, the role of repeated auctions, where past outcomes shape future strategies. How does the dynamic interplay of repeated bidding affect the long-term equilibrium? This becomes our bridge to the next economic consideration. Chapter 26: Bidding Strategies in English Auctions, Incremental Bidding and Sniping. Good evening. As we drift further into the quiet understanding of auctions, we turn tonight to the subtle dance of bidding strategies, specifically within the familiar form of the English auction. You'll recall that in our previous exploration, we laid the groundwork, establishing the common knowledge of value, as well as the variations that can emerge in this game of economic will. Now, we will examine how bidders maneuver within the framework of the English auction, how they seek to extract the greatest surplus, and how these strategies affect the overall efficiency and revenue generated by the auction itself. The English auction, that ascending price ritual we observe at art galleries or perhaps on online marketplaces, presents a seemingly straightforward structure. Bidders openly declare their willingness to pay increasingly higher prices until only one remains. However, beneath this surface simplicity lies a complex landscape of strategic considerations. The most intuitive approach, of course, is incremental bidding. This involves raising one's bid by the smallest allowable increment whenever another bidder challenges one's current position as the highest bidder. Think of it as a slow, steady climb towards the summit of price. The rationale behind incremental bidding is rooted in the desire to avoid overpaying. By only increasing the bid when necessary, a bidder hopes to discover the true willingness to pay of their competitors. It's a process of revealing information, albeit slowly, about the value the others place on the item being auctioned. This strategy is particularly effective when a bidder has some uncertainty about the item's true worth. Incremental bidding allows for course correction, a chance to reassess as the bidding progresses, much like adjusting the sails of a ship to navigate changing winds. However, incremental bidding is not without its vulnerabilities. It reveals one's interest in the item early and clearly, potentially attracting more competitors and driving up the final price. It also allows other bidders to strategically manipulate the bidding process, perhaps by feigning disinterest and then suddenly re-entering the fray, forcing the incremental bidder to pay more than they initially anticipated. The dance of information can be deceptive. This leads us to a contrasting strategy: sniping. Sniping involves waiting until the very last moment of the auction, to place a single, decisive bid. This tactic, popularized by online auction platforms, aims to deprive other bidders of the opportunity to respond, effectively stealing the prize at the 11th hour. The appeal of sniping is clear. It minimizes the risk of escalating the price unnecessarily. It keeps one's cards close to the chest, preventing competitors from gleaning information about one's valuation until it is too late to react. It's akin to ambushing the market with a single, well-placed shot. But sniping, too, carries its own risks. Timing is crucial. A slight miscalculation, a momentary internet hiccup, and the bid may arrive too late, resulting in utter defeat. Furthermore, in auctions with automatic extensions triggered by last-minute bids, sniping can inadvertently lengthen the bidding process, ultimately leading to a higher final price than initially desired. And of course, if another bidder also employs a sniping strategy with a higher valuation, the first sniper loses, having revealed their interest only to come up short. It's a high-stakes game of calculated risk. Now, consider the broader implications of these strategies. How do they affect the overall revenue generated by the auction? In theory, an auction with more bidders and more aggressive bidding should lead to a higher price. However, the presence of snipers can disrupt this dynamic, potentially suppressing the final price if other bidders are hesitant to engage early. The classical economist might argue that with enough rational participants, the optimal strategy, whether incremental or sniping, will ultimately reveal the true value. But as we know, human behavior is rarely perfectly rational. The policymaker, observing this landscape, might be interested in designing auction rules that encourage efficient outcomes. Would regulations aimed at discouraging sniping, such as eliminating automatic extensions, lead to higher revenue or greater efficiency? Or would such interventions simply shift the strategic landscape, leading to new and unforeseen bidding patterns? These are questions that continue to occupy the minds of economists and auction theorists. The choice between incremental bidding and sniping, therefore, is not simply a matter of personal preference. It depends on a complex interplay of factors, including the bidder's valuation, the number and behavior of other bidders, and the specific rules of the auction. Each strategy represents a different approach to navigating the uncertainty and strategic complexity inherent in the auction process. They are different paths up the same mountain, each fraught with its own challenges and rewards. As the evening deepens, perhaps you are beginning to ponder how these strategies mirror the challenges of negotiation in life. And as we lay the groundwork for the next chapter, perhaps you are already asking yourself, what happens when the bidders collude? Bidding strategies in sealed bid auctions, shadow bids, and risk assessment. Welcome back, friends. We've previously explored the diverse landscapes of auction formats, from the frenetic open outcry to the hushed intensity of sealed bids. Tonight, we delve deeper into the silent world of sealed bid auctions, focusing on the strategic considerations of bidders, specifically the concepts of shadow bids and risk assessment. Imagine a solitary bidder contemplating their offer. They cannot observe the actions of others. Their decision is a delicate dance between potential gain and potential loss. In this environment, the concept of a shadow bid emerges as a critical navigational tool. The shadow bid, at its core, is a bidder's private valuation of the item being auctioned. It represents the maximum price they are willing to pay, the point beyond which acquiring the object would result in a net loss. It's the intrinsic worth, tinged with individual need and perceived benefit. The shadow bid is not necessarily what a bidder will bid. It's their internal anchor, a point of reference against which bidding strategies are formulated. A naive approach might be to simply bid one's shadow bid. However, such a strategy ignores the competitive landscape, even in its unseen form. This is where risk assessment enters the equation. Risk assessment in sealed bid auctions revolves around estimating the bids of other participants. This is, of course, fraught with uncertainty. Bidders must consider factors such as the number of competitors, their likely valuations, and their individual risk tolerances. Are they aggressive bidders, driven by a desire to win at almost any cost? Or are they more cautious, prioritizing profit margin over guaranteed acquisition? The risk aversion of a bidder plays a crucial role. A risk-averse bidder fearing the prospect of overpaying, might shade their bid below their shadow bid, sacrificing some probability of winning to ensure a larger profit margin if successful. Conversely, a risk-neutral bidder might bid closer to their shadow bid, accepting a greater risk of overpaying in exchange for a higher probability of winning the auction. The strategy here isn't about winning at all costs, rather maximizing the expected payoff. Mathematical models, often built upon game theory, can assist in formulating optimal bidding strategies. These models typically incorporate assumptions about the distribution of bidder valuations and their risk preferences. While these models provide valuable insights, it's important to remember that they are simplifications of a complex reality. The real world is often messier than any equation can fully capture. Human psychology, unexpected market fluctuations, and even plain luck can all influence the outcome of an auction. The classical economist, focused on maximizing efficiency, might argue for mechanisms that incentivize truthful revelation of shadow bids. If every bidder were to honestly reveal their valuation, resources would flow to those who value them most highly, leading to a Pareto-efficient allocation. However, the incentive to strategize, to shade bids and exploit information asymmetries is often too strong to overcome. This inherent tension between efficiency and strategic behavior lies at the heart of auction design. The policymaker, concerned with revenue maximization, faces a different challenge. They must design auction mechanisms that extract as much surplus as possible from the bidders without deterring participation. This often involves balancing the risk exposure of bidders with the potential for windfall gains. A well-designed auction mechanism should be both efficient and revenue-generating, a delicate balancing act requiring careful consideration of bidder behavior. Consider, for instance, the first price sealed bid auction, where the highest bidder wins and pays their bid. In this format, the incentive to shade one's bid is strong. Bidders recognize that they only need to outbid their closest competitor, not pay their true valuation. This leads to a phenomenon known as the winner's curse, where the winning bidder often overestimates the value of the item, having outbid all others. To mitigate the winner's curse, bidders typically shade their bids further, leading to lower overall revenue for the seller. As we conclude, reflect on the enduring puzzle of auction design. How can we create mechanisms that not only allocate resources efficiently, but also generate substantial revenue for the seller, all while accounting for the inherent strategic behavior of bidders? This question leads us naturally to our next exploration: the role of information in shaping auction outcomes. The subtle nuances of information available to bidders, or withheld from them, significantly influence strategic choices, affecting both efficiency and revenue. Good night. Chapter 28. Automated Bidding. Algorithms and Artificial Intelligence. Friends, we've traversed the landscape of auction theory, observing the dance of demand and supply under various rules. We witnessed the strategic posturing, the shading of bids, and the delicate balance between revelation and concealment. Now, our journey leads us to a fascinating intersection: the realm of automated bidding, where algorithms and artificial intelligence step onto the stage. Tonight, we consider how these computational entities are reshaping auction dynamics, altering the revenue landscape, and redefining efficiency. The transition from human-driven bidding to algorithm-driven bidding is not merely a technological shift. It's a fundamental alteration in the very nature of strategic interaction. Where once sat a human, susceptible to emotion, prone to error, now resides a program, coldly calculating, relentlessly optimizing. The implications are profound. Consider, if you will, the common auction formats: the English auction, the Dutch auction, the sealed bid first price auction, the Vickrey auction. Each format, as we've discussed, generates different expected revenues and fosters different efficiency levels, predicated on the rational behavior of human agents. But what happens when these agents are replaced by algorithms? The answer, unsurprisingly, is it depends. It depends on the algorithm, its design, its objectives. A simple bidding algorithm might merely mimic human behavior, perhaps shading bids based on a predetermined risk aversion coefficient. But more sophisticated algorithms, those employing machine learning and reinforcement learning techniques, can adapt and evolve, learning from past auctions to optimize their bidding strategies in real time. These advanced algorithms introduce a layer of complexity previously unimaginable. They can identify subtle patterns in bidding data, anticipate the strategies of other bidders, and dynamically adjust their own bids to maximize expected profit. This is where the concept of artificial intelligence truly comes into play. The algorithm is not simply executing a pre-programmed set of instructions. It is learning, adapting, and evolving, much like a seasoned auction participant. But this algorithmic arms race raises several critical questions. Does it lead to greater revenue for the seller? The answer isn't straightforward. On one hand, the increased efficiency of algorithms in extracting value from private information could drive up prices. On the other hand, the potential for collusion, either explicit or tacit, among algorithms could depress prices. If several algorithms learn to coordinate their bids, even without explicit communication, they could effectively form a cartel, extracting rents from the seller. The policymaker must be ever vigilant. Regulating algorithmic bidding is a thorny challenge. Traditional antitrust laws, designed to prevent collusion among human actors, may not be directly applicable to algorithms. How do you prove collusion when there is no evidence of explicit communication, only statistical correlation in bidding patterns? How do you ensure fairness and transparency in a market dominated by opaque algorithms? Efficiency, too, is impacted. While algorithms can potentially allocate goods to the bidders who value them most highly, the potential for algorithmic biases and unintended consequences raises concerns. An algorithm trained on historical data that reflects existing societal inequalities could perpetuate and amplify those inequalities in the auction outcome. The pursuit of efficiency must therefore be tempered with a consideration of fairness and equity. The classical economist might argue that market forces will eventually sort these issues out, that competition among algorithms will drive them towards socially optimal outcomes. But history suggests that unregulated markets are prone to failures, and that careful regulation is often necessary to ensure that markets serve the public good. And so, as we draw to a close, consider this. We've seen how the introduction of automated bidding, driven by algorithms and artificial intelligence, is profoundly reshaping the landscape of auction. It presents both opportunities and challenges. It raises fundamental questions about revenue, efficiency, and fairness. Most importantly, it forces us to rethink our understanding of strategic interaction in a world increasingly dominated by intelligent machines. What new theoretical models must be developed to capture the dynamics of algorithmic competition? And how will our policy frameworks evolve to accommodate the rise of the algorithmic auctioneer? These are questions for another time, as we prepare to delve into the nuances of market design. High-frequency bidding, the speed of modern auctions. Having considered the broad canvas of auction formats, and how subtle shifts in those formats can alter outcomes, our gaze now turns to the truly contemporary expression of these mechanisms: high-frequency bidding. We've explored the foundations, the different brushstrokes. Now, let's contemplate the acceleration of the painting's creation. High-frequency bidding, or HFB, is the application of algorithmic trading to auctions. Think of it as the natural, almost inevitable, progression of auctions in a world increasingly defined by computational power. Where once human bidders deliberated, observed, and reacted, now sophisticated programs, reacting in milliseconds, engage in a rapid dance of offer and counteroffer. This, of course, fundamentally alters the terrain of both auction revenue and efficiency. The primary impact, and perhaps the most readily apparent, lies in the sheer volume of bids. An auction, traditionally a relatively infrequent event, becomes a continuous stream of offers. This constant flux creates a more granular market. Imagine a flowing river, initially sluggish and predictable. With HFB, the river becomes a rushing torrent, carving new channels and reshaping the landscape in real time. What does this mean for revenue? The classical economist, approaching this with a model of perfect information, might initially suggest that increased bid frequency should inherently lead to higher revenue. More bids, theoretically, allow the seller to extract more surplus. But the reality, as often happens, proves far more nuanced. The key consideration is information asymmetry. While HFB programs have access to vast quantities of data, not all data is created equal. The signal can be obscured by noise. These algorithms are predicated on anticipating the behavior of other bidders, both human and algorithmic, and adjusting their strategies accordingly. A critical advantage can arise, then, from possessing superior predictive models, or simply from faster processing speed. This creates a feedback loop. Those with an initial advantage can further refine their algorithms, creating a widening gap in informational access. Furthermore, the potential for collusion, either explicit or implicit, raises its head. Algorithms programmed by different actors, exposed to similar datasets, may independently converge on similar bidding strategies. This can subtly, or not so subtly, dampen competition, leading to lower overall revenue for the seller. Regulators, like the policymaker, must grapple with this complexity, striving to ensure a level playing field in this rapidly evolving landscape. Efficiency, in the context of HFB, takes on a slightly different meaning. Traditionally, efficiency in auctions is measured by how effectively the item or service is allocated to the bidder who values it most highly. High-frequency bidding, at first glance, might seem to promote efficiency by allowing for a more precise and responsive allocation. However, the speed and complexity introduce new sources of inefficiency. The potential for market manipulation increases significantly. Algorithms can be designed to create artificial price movements, either to scare off competitors or to profit from short-term fluctuations. This undermines the core principle of auctions, that prices should reflect true underlying value. Consider a delicate ecosystem. Introducing a hyper-competitive species can disrupt the natural balance, leading to instability and potentially collapse. Another subtle inefficiency stems from the cognitive burden placed on human participants. When faced with a relentless barrage of algorithmic bids, human bidders may become overwhelmed, leading to suboptimal decisions. They might withdraw from the auction altogether, reducing competition and ultimately harming efficiency. In summary, high-frequency bidding represents a double-edged sword. It holds the promise of increased revenue and greater allocation efficiency, but also introduces the risks of information asymmetry, collusion, and market manipulation. Navigating this complex terrain requires a deep understanding of both the underlying economics and the technical intricacies of algorithmic trade. As we conclude this chapter, we are left to ponder the next stage. What novel auction formats will emerge to exploit the strengths and mitigate the weaknesses of HFB? Will regulation be able to keep pace with the relentless march of technology? Will we see the rise of entirely new forms of economic exchange, shaped by the logic of algorithms and the speed of light? These questions, like the slow turn of the tide, beckon us towards the next chapter in our exploration of auctions and bidding strategies. Chapter 30. Spectrum Auctions. Allocating wireless frequencies. Having navigated the complexities of public goods, our journey now gently shifts towards the fascinating world of auctions, specifically as they relate to the allocation of a scarce and vital resource: wireless frequencies. Imagine, if you will, the electromagnetic spectrum as a vast, invisible ocean, a sea of potential for communication, broadcasting, and data transfer. But, like land, this ocean is not limitless. Certain frequencies are more desirable than others, and the question then becomes, how do we allocate these limited resources in an efficient and equitable manner? Auctions, in their elegant simplicity, offer a potential solution. They are mechanisms for price discovery, allowing the market to reveal the true value that different entities place on a particular item, or in our case, a segment of the spectrum. But the devil, as always, is in the details. The design of the auction, its specific rules and format, profoundly impacts the outcome, influencing both the revenue generated and the overall efficiency of the allocation. Let us first consider some of the common auction formats. The English auction, perhaps the most familiar, is an ascending price auction where bidders openly compete, raising their bids until only one remains. Its transparency is appealing. Participants have a clear understanding of the competitive landscape. The Dutch auction, conversely, begins with a high price that is gradually lowered until a bidder accepts. This format can incentivize quicker decision-making, but may also lead to missed opportunities if bidders hesitate. Sealed bid auctions, both first price and second price, introduce an element of uncertainty. In a first price sealed bid auction, bidders submit their bids privately, and the highest bidder wins and pays their bid. The second price sealed bid auction, also known as a Vickrey auction, is conceptually similar, but the highest bidder wins but pays the second highest bid. Each format presents its own set of strategic considerations. In a first price sealed bid auction, for example, bidders must balance the desire to win with the risk of overpaying. They typically shade their bids below their true valuation, a phenomenon known as bid shading. The second price auction, however, induces bidders to bid their true valuation, as there is no penalty for overbidding. This property makes it strategy-proof. Now, let's turn our attention to the thorny question of revenue generation. Which auction format yields the most revenue for the government, or, more generally, the seller? Economic theory suggests that, under certain idealized conditions, all of the standard auction formats generate the same expected revenue. This is known as the revenue equivalence theorem. However, these conditions rarely hold in the real world. Factors such as bidder risk aversion, information asymmetry, and the presence of collusion can all influence the outcome. Spectrum auctions are particularly susceptible to these complicating factors. The values of different frequency bands are often interdependent, meaning that the value of one band to a bidder may depend on whether they also acquire other bands. This creates opportunities for strategic bidding and potentially inefficient outcomes. Moreover, the presence of only a few dominant players in the telecommunications industry can raise concerns about collusion, where bidders coordinate their actions to suppress prices. Beyond revenue, the primary goal of spectrum auctions is to allocate these resources efficiently, ensuring that they are used by those who value them most highly. This means that the spectrum should end up in the hands of the firms that can best utilize it to provide valuable services to consumers. But efficient allocation is not always guaranteed, even in well-designed auctions. The winner's curse, for example, can arise when bidders overestimate the true value of the spectrum, leading to regret and potentially inefficient investments. The winner's curse dictates that if you win, it means that you overestimated the asset's value, by definition of being the highest bidder. Therefore, the policymaker must carefully weigh different auction designs, considering the trade-offs between revenue generation, efficiency, and fairness. They must also be mindful of the potential for strategic behavior and take steps to mitigate risks, such as collusion and the winner's curse. This might involve implementing safeguards, such as reserve prices, bid caps, and anti-collusion rules. As our exploration of auctions comes to a close, one question lingers. How do we effectively encourage participation and innovation in markets where entry barriers are high and only a few large players dominate? This leads us naturally into our next topic, the study of market structure and its impact on competition and innovation. Chapter 31. Treasury Auctions. Government debt issuance and management. As we've navigated the ebbs and flows of monetary policy, we arrive now at a crucial juncture: how governments finance their activities. This is the domain of treasury auctions, where sovereign debt is offered to the market. Think of it as a carefully choreographed ballet between the government, seeking funds, and investors, seeking returns. The mechanics of this dance, the auction formats, the bidding strategies, and the overall efficiency profoundly impact both the stability of public finances and the broader economy. The heart of a treasury auction lies in its format, dial. The most common are the discriminatory or multiple price auction and the uniform price or Dutch auction. In the discriminatory auction, bidders pay the price they bid. Imagine a room full of individuals, each whispering their maximum willingness to pay to an auctioneer. Those who bid highest win, but each pays their individual, whispered amount. This format encourages aggressive bidding, as securing the debt requires outbidding competitors, but it also carries the risk of winner's curse, overpaying relative to the true market value. In contrast, The uniform price auction adopts a more egalitarian approach. All winning bidders pay the lowest accepted bid. This encourages bidders to reveal their true valuation more honestly, as they don't fear overpaying. If they overestimate, they still pay the market clearing price. This format often leads to higher participation and potentially greater stability in prices. The question then arises, which format yields higher revenue for the government? The answer, unsurprisingly, is nuanced. Theoretical models suggest that the discriminatory auction should generate more revenue, as bidders are incentivized to bid higher. However, empirical evidence is often less conclusive. Human psychology plays a critical role. Bidders, wary of the winner's curse, may shade their bids in discriminatory auctions, potentially offsetting the revenue advantage. The optimal format often depends on the specific characteristics of the debt instrument, the prevailing market conditions, and the sophistication of the bidders. It's a constant calibration, a delicate balancing act. Beyond revenue, auction efficiency is paramount. Efficiency, in this context, refers to the extent to which the debt is allocated to those who value it most highly, at a price that reflects its true worth. A highly efficient auction promotes price discovery, allowing the market to accurately assess the risk and return characteristics of the debt. This, in turn, facilitates the smooth functioning of the bond market and reduces the government's borrowing costs over the long term. Both auction formats can achieve efficiency under different assumptions. The uniform price auction, with its emphasis on truthful revelation, often fosters greater allocative efficiency. The discriminatory auction, while potentially leading to overpayment by some, can also swiftly allocate the debt to those most willing to bear the risk. Bidding strategies are similarly complex. Large institutional investors, such as pension funds and insurance companies, often employ sophisticated econometric models to estimate the fair value of the debt. They analyze macroeconomic indicators, interest rate forecasts, and historical auction data to formulate their bids. Smaller investors may rely on simpler heuristics, such as following the lead of larger players or bidding conservatively to avoid overpaying. The interplay of these diverse strategies shapes the auction outcome. The policymaker faces a constant challenge: to design auction mechanisms that maximize revenue, promote efficiency, and ensure broad participation. They may experiment with different auction formats, adjust the size of the offering, or provide information to the market to reduce uncertainty. The goal is to create a level playing field that encourages informed bidding and reflects the true value of the debt. Consider it a kind of stewardship, tending to the delicate ecosystem of government finance. Ultimately, Treasury auctions are more than just a technical exercise in debt issuance. They are a reflection of the government's credibility, the market's confidence, and the overall health of the economy. They represent a critical link between public finance and the broader financial system. We have explored the format and strategies of bidding within Treasury auctions, but what about the ongoing management of this debt? How does this affect long-term national solvency? This question lingers, beckoning us to the next stage of our economic exploration. Chapter 32. Art Auctions. The intersection of value, emotion, and prestige. We've traced the contours of markets, driven by rational actors, by clear supply and demand curves. But what happens when the very definition of value becomes murky? Let us turn our gaze toward the fascinating world of art auctions, a place where economics meets aesthetics, where logic tangles with emotion, and where the pursuit of prestige shapes bidding strategy. At its heart, an art auction is a marketplace, albeit one operating under unique conditions. Understanding the different auction formats is crucial. There's the English auction, that familiar, ascending bid process, where the highest bidder wins. It's straightforward, seemingly transparent. Then there's the Dutch auction, a descending bid structure, where the price starts high and decreases until someone cries, "Sold," a less common but sometimes quicker method. Sealed bid auctions introduce an element of strategic secrecy. Bidders submit their offers privately, and the highest bid wins. And finally, there's the Vickrey auction, a sealed bid format where the winner pays the second highest bid. This last format, theoretically, encourages bidders to reveal their true valuation, mitigating the so-called winner's curse, the regret of overpaying. Each format possesses its own characteristics, advantages, and disadvantages in terms of revenue generation and allocation efficiency. But let's delve deeper into the concept of revenue. The classical economists might see auctions as purely mechanisms for efficiently allocating goods to those who value them most, maximizing societal welfare. Ideally, the highest bidder truly appreciates the artwork the most, and the auction ensures it ends up in their possession. In practice, however, things are rarely so clean. The final price achieved at auction is influenced not only by the inherent aesthetic value of the piece, but also by factors like perceived provenance, historical context, the reputations of the artist and previous owners, and even the social atmosphere of the auction itself. Bidding wars can erupt, fueled by rivalry and the desire for status, driving prices far beyond any rational assessment of the artwork's intrinsic worth. This presents a challenge to efficiency, as measured by pure utilitarian standards. Furthermore, consider the role of information. An auction is, fundamentally, a mechanism for price discovery. It aggregates the dispersed knowledge of many potential buyers into a single, revealed price. But that process is fraught with imperfections. Information asymmetry abounds. Some bidders may possess privileged knowledge about the artwork's history or future prospects. Others might rely on expert opinions or simply follow the lead of perceived market leaders. This creates opportunities for strategic bidding. A sophisticated bidder might deliberately underestimate their initial bids to discourage competition, or they might engage in signaling, bidding high to convey confidence and potentially inflate the perceived value for others. These games introduce inefficiencies, deviating from the ideal scenario where the artwork goes to the individual who genuinely values it the most. Bidding strategies themselves are a complex dance between valuation, risk aversion, and perceived competition. A risk-averse bidder might bid conservatively, sacrificing the chance of winning for the security of avoiding overpayment. A risk-seeking bidder, on the other hand, might be more aggressive, willing to gamble on the chance of acquiring the artwork, even if it means potentially exceeding its true value. The number of bidders also significantly influences strategy. In a market with few participants, a more aggressive bidding strategy might be optimal. In a crowded auction, however, a more cautious approach may be warranted to avoid getting caught up in a bidding war. The optimal strategy becomes a delicate balancing act, a continuous assessment of the competitive landscape. Now, let us consider the perspective of the policymaker. Art auctions, while seemingly niche, have broader implications for market design. The lessons learned from analyzing these high-stakes interactions can be applied to other contexts, such as spectrum auctions, government procurement contracts, and even online advertising markets. Understanding the nuances of bidding behavior, the impact of different auction formats, and the role of information asymmetry can lead to the design of more efficient and equitable markets in a wide range of industries. The art world, in its extravagant and often irrational way, provides a valuable laboratory for understanding fundamental economic principles. Ultimately, art auctions are a fascinating microcosm of the complexities of human behavior and the challenges of market design. They highlight the limitations of purely rational models, forcing us to acknowledge the influence of emotion, prestige, and strategic interaction. As we prepare to consider the role of government intervention in markets, let us ponder, how far can policy nudge markets towards optimal efficiency without stifling the very forces that give them life and dynamism? Chapter 33. Real estate auctions, a fast track to property sales. Welcome back. We've navigated the intricacies of property valuation, and now let us consider a dynamic mechanism by which those values are revealed and assets transferred: the real estate auction. Auctions, in their essence, represent a concentrated form of market activity, a crucible where demand and supply forces collide to forge a final price. We will explore their formats, the revenue they generate, and their overall efficiency in allocating resources. Auctions, like rivers, flow in various channels. The most common, perhaps, is the English auction, also known as an ascending bid auction. Here, bidders openly compete, raising their bids until only one remains, declared the winner, and paying the final price. Its simplicity is appealing, Yet strategically, it encourages gradual price discovery, allowing participants to observe the valuations of others, potentially influencing their own. The incentive to bid higher increases as other bidders signal strong interest, even if the fundamental value doesn't warrant it. Conversely, the Dutch auction, or descending bid auction, starts with a high price, which is then lowered incrementally until a bidder accepts it. This format is less frequently used in real estate due to the inherent risk that the first bidder might secure the property at a price significantly below its potential market value. Its strength lies in speed. A single, decisive act determines the sale, but it demands decisive valuation beforehand. A more discreet approach is the sealed bid auction. In this structure, all bidders submit their bids simultaneously and secretly. The highest bidder wins, but pays either their own bid or the second highest bid. The allure of sealed bid auctions lies in their perceived fairness and the avoidance of escalating bidding wars. However, they necessitate a high degree of independent valuation accuracy, as there's no opportunity to react to the bids of others. Each of these formats yields differing revenue outcomes. The revenue equivalence theorem, a cornerstone of auction theory, suggests that under certain idealized conditions, risk neutrality, independent private values, and symmetric information, these different auction formats should generate approximately the same expected revenue for the seller. However, reality rarely adheres perfectly to these conditions. Risk aversion, for example, can significantly skew results. If bidders are hesitant to overpay, they might bid more conservatively in a first-price sealed bid auction than they would in an English auction where they can observe the competition. Information asymmetry, where some bidders possess more insights into the property's true value than others, further complicates matters. Informed bidders might exploit this advantage, potentially suppressing the final sale price. The efficiency of an auction hinges on its ability to allocate the property to the bidder who values it most highly. Ideally, the winner should be the individual who derives the greatest utility from owning the asset. However, strategic bidding and informational imperfections can hinder this outcome. Winner's curse, a phenomenon common in auctions of uncertain value, arises when the winning bidder overestimates the asset's true worth and subsequently regrets their purchase. This can occur when bidders are overly optimistic or fail to adequately account for the uncertainty surrounding the property's characteristics. Real estate auctions, when properly structured and executed, can offer significant advantages. They can accelerate the sales process, create a sense of urgency, and potentially attract a larger pool of buyers than traditional sales methods. They can also establish a transparent and competitive pricing environment, reducing the potential for protracted negotiations. However, they also require careful planning, accurate property assessment, and a clear understanding of the target audience. The choice of auction format, marketing strategy, and reserve price all play critical roles in determining the auction's success. Consider the role of shilling, an unethical practice where the seller, or someone acting on their behalf, places artificial bids to drive up the price. Such manipulations undermine the integrity of the auction and can have severe legal consequences. Transparency and ethical conduct are paramount to maintaining trust and ensuring a fair outcome for all participants. Furthermore, the broader economic environment significantly influences auction outcomes. Interest rates, economic growth, and consumer confidence all impact demand, and consequently, the prices realized at auction. A period of economic expansion typically translates to increased bidding activity and higher sale prices, while a recession may dampen enthusiasm and lead to lower valuations. So, as we reflect upon the auction mechanism, we are left to ponder. While auctions promise a rapid transmutation of assets, how effectively do they truly sift the wheat from the chaff and ensure resources flow to those who value them most? And what distortions are introduced by the participants who have access to privileged information? These are critical considerations that circle back to the very heart of economic efficiency and resource allocation, topics we will continue to explore in the days ahead. What tools will policymakers adopt to mitigate information asymmetry in the auction process? Charity auctions. Raising funds for good causes. We've explored the intricacies of market dynamics, the ebb and flow of supply and demand. Now, let's consider a specific application, a vibrant intersection of economics and altruism, the charity auction. These events, often filled with both excitement and a genuine desire to contribute, provide a fascinating lens through which to examine the power of auctions and bidding strategies, and their impact on revenue and efficiency. Auctions, at their core, are mechanisms for allocating goods or services when a clear market price doesn't readily exist. Think of a one-of-a-kind piece of art, a celebrity encounter, or indeed, a donated vacation package at a charity event. The challenge is to discover the true value that potential buyers place on these unique items. Bidding, of course, is the language through which these values are expressed. There exists a surprisingly diverse taxonomy of auction formats. The English auction, perhaps the most familiar, unfolds with ascending bids. Participants openly compete, raising the price until only one bidder remains, claiming the item at their maximum willingness to pay, or at least what they publicly profess to be their maximum. Then there's the Dutch auction, a less common but intriguing reverse process, where the price starts high and gradually decreases until a bidder accepts. This approach often favors speed, but it can also leave potential revenue on the table if the initial price isn't calibrated correctly. Consider also the sealed bid auction. Here, each participant submits their bid privately. The highest bidder wins, but the price they pay depends on the specific variant. In a first-price sealed bid auction, the winner pays their own bid. This format encourages bidders to shade their bids downwards, accounting for the risk of overpaying. A more subtle, and perhaps counterintuitively more profitable, approach is the second-price sealed bid auction, also known as a Vickrey auction. The winner, though submitting the highest bid, pays only the second highest bid. This cleverly aligns incentives, encouraging bidders to reveal their true valuation, as there's little downside to bidding truthfully. A slight variation on this is the all-pay auction, where everyone pays their bid, regardless of whether they win. Think of lobbying contests or grant applications. The charity benefits from all bids submitted, regardless of who secures the prize. The revenue generated by an auction is, naturally, of paramount importance, particularly in a charitable context. The classical economist often viewed auctions through the lens of efficiency. How well does the auction allocate the item to the bidder who values it most highly? And how does it extract the maximum surplus from the winning bidder, for the benefit of the seller, in this case, the charity? Efficiency and revenue are intertwined, but not always perfectly aligned. A poorly designed auction, or one populated by unsophisticated bidders, can lead to suboptimal outcomes, where items are either undervalued or allocated inefficiently. Bidding strategies, therefore, are crucial. Game theory provides a valuable toolkit for analyzing these strategies. Rational bidders, in theory, should consider not only their own valuation of an item, but also the likely valuations of other participants. The policymaker might be interested in strategies to nudge bidders towards contributing more, perhaps by highlighting the charitable cause, or by making the process more transparent and engaging. In the context of charity auctions, bidding behavior can be further influenced by factors beyond pure economic calculation. Social pressure, a desire to be seen as generous, or simply the emotional connection to the cause, can all inflate bids beyond what a purely rational economic agent might offer. This is not necessarily a bad thing. It reflects the unique nature of charitable giving, where intrinsic motivations often outweigh extrinsic ones. The design of a charity auction, then, requires a delicate balancing act. It must be engaging and entertaining, fostering a sense of community and generosity. But it must also be structured in a way that maximizes revenue and ensures that the donated items find their way to those who truly value them, both intrinsically and economically. We've explored the fascinating interplay of auction formats, bidding strategies, and charitable giving. As we drift onwards, consider this. How might the burgeoning field of behavioral economics, with its insights into cognitive biases and emotional decision-making, further refine our understanding of bidding behavior, not just in charity auctions, but in the broader landscape of market interactions? What hidden forces might shape our economic choices, often without our conscious awareness? Chapter 35. Liquidation, Auctions. Recovering value from assets, we've navigated the ebb and flow of market creation, observed pricing mechanisms in their dynamic dance. Now, let us turn our gaze toward the opposite end of the spectrum: the shedding, the dispersal, the necessary untangling that follows growth. Specifically, the realm of liquidation auctions. In times of economic contraction, or simply organizational restructuring, assets must often be divested, their inherent worth translated back into liquid capital. And within this process, the auction stands as a crucial instrument. Auctions, at their heart, are information revelation mechanisms. They serve to aggregate the dispersed knowledge of potential buyers regarding the true worth of an asset. The very structure of the auction, its format, profoundly influences the revelation of this information, and consequently, the revenue generated and the overall efficiency of the resource allocation. Let us consider the landscape of these formats. There are, of course, the familiar English auctions, ascending bid affairs where participants progressively raise their offers until only one bidder remains. This format, seemingly straightforward, has subtle properties. Its strength lies in its capacity to extract information incrementally. Bidders, observing the bids of others, can refine their own valuations, adjusting their strategies based on the collective insight of the market. However, it can also be susceptible to the winner's curse, a phenomenon where the winning bidder overestimates the true value of the asset due to the competitive fervor of the auction. The key to navigating this format is a sober assessment of one's own valuation, independent of the bidding frenzy. Then we have the Dutch auction, the descending bid counterpart. Here, the auctioneer begins with a high price and gradually lowers it until a bidder signals their acceptance. This format, often quicker than the English auction, tends to favor bidders with strong convictions about the asset's worth. The pressure lies in making a timely decision, as hesitating may mean losing the opportunity to acquire the asset at a potentially favorable price. However, this format may also suppress full revelation of value since participants fear revealing their willingness to pay early on, losing potential surplus. Beyond these, we encounter sealed bid auctions, where bidders submit their offers in secret. There are two main variations. First price sealed bid auctions, where the highest bidder wins and pays their bid, and second price sealed bid auctions, often called Vickrey auctions, where the highest bidder wins but pays only the second highest bid. The Vickrey auction, a seemingly counterintuitive design, possesses an elegant theoretical property. It incentivizes bidders to bid their true valuation. This truth-telling mechanism, however, hinges on the assumption of independent private values, that each bidder's valuation is independent of the other's valuations. The revenue generated by an auction is intimately linked to its format and the characteristics of the bidders. The revenue equivalence theorem, a cornerstone of auction theory, posits that under certain conditions, different auction formats will yield the same expected revenue for the seller. These conditions include risk neutrality among bidders, independent private values, and a symmetric distribution of valuations. However, these are often violated in practice, resulting in observed revenue differences across formats. For instance, auctions where the asset possesses a common value, rather than purely private value, can deviate substantially from these theoretical predictions. Efficiency, in the context of auctions, refers to the allocation of the asset to the bidder who values it most highly. An efficient auction ensures that resources are allocated where they generate the greatest societal benefit. The Vickrey auction, with its truth-telling incentives, tends to be highly efficient. However, efficiency can be compromised by factors such as collusion among bidders or the presence of externalities, costs, or benefits that accrue to parties not directly involved in the auction. The policymaker, when designing liquidation auctions for government assets or managing distressed assets after a financial crisis, must consider these nuances. The chosen format should align with the specific characteristics of the assets being sold and the objectives of the sale. Maximizing revenue is not always the sole priority. Ensuring broad participation, promoting transparency, and achieving efficient resource allocation can also be crucial considerations. As we conclude our exploration of liquidation auctions, Let us consider a lingering question. How does the strategic interaction among auction participants extend beyond individual auctions and influence the broader dynamics of secondary markets, the arena where assets are resold and reallocated after the initial auction process? This is a query we will need to consider further as we move along the river of economic understanding. Chapter 36. The Psychology of Bidding, Emotional Drivers and Cognitive Biases, the serene surface of auction theory, with its neat equations and strategic calculations, often obscures the turbulent psychological depths beneath. We speak of rational actors maximizing utility, yet the auction room, or its virtual equivalent, is often a stage for a drama of emotions and cognitive quirks. To truly understand bidding, we must delve into these often irrational drivers. The first, and perhaps most primal, is loss aversion. The prospect of losing, even an opportunity, looms larger in our minds than the potential gain of acquiring the same item. This manifests strongly in auctions. A bidder, close to winning, may escalate their bids beyond what a purely rational calculation would dictate, driven by almost visceral fear of walking away empty-handed, of feeling defeated. The sunk cost fallacy often reinforces this. The money already spent researching, attending, or participating in the auction becomes an emotional investment, making it harder to cut losses, even when logic screams for restraint. Consider, for a moment, the effect of social proof. We are, by nature, social creatures, constantly calibrating our behavior against that of others. In an auction setting, the presence of other bidders, especially prominent or seemingly knowledgeable ones, can significantly influence our own valuations. If multiple parties are aggressively bidding on an item, we may unconsciously infer that its true value is higher than our initial assessment, leading us to adjust our bids upwards. This herd mentality, while sometimes beneficial in aggregating information, can also lead to overbidding and the dreaded winner's curse. Then there's the allure of scarcity. Auctions, by their very nature, create artificial scarcity. Only one bidder can ultimately win. This inherent limitation amplifies the perceived value of the item being auctioned. Limited edition prints, rare artifacts, even seemingly mundane objects, become imbued with a unique desirability simply because they are scarce and potentially unattainable. The classical economist might argue that value should be intrinsic, tied to utility. However, the perception of scarcity, skillfully exploited by auctioneers, can significantly inflate bids, exceeding any rational valuation based on fundamental usefulness. Framing effects also play a subtle, yet powerful role. The way an item is presented, the language used to describe it, the comparisons made to other items, all these elements can influence a bidder's perception of its worth. A painting described as a masterpiece by a renowned artist will likely attract higher bids than the same painting simply described as an old canvas. Auction houses are keenly aware of these psychological nuances and use them to strategically frame the items they offer. Another key factor is overconfidence. Many bidders overestimate their own knowledge and abilities, believing they possess superior insights into the true value of an item. This overconfidence can lead to aggressive bidding and a disregard for risk. The bidder, blinded by their perceived expertise, may ignore warning signs or dismiss the valuations of others, ultimately overpaying for the item. Endowment effect also comes into play, especially for bidders who have previously owned similar items. They may assign a higher value to the item at auction simply because it resonates with their past experiences or complements their existing collection. This emotional attachment can lead to bidding beyond what a purely objective assessment would warrant. The policymaker, aware of these cognitive biases, can implement strategies to mitigate their negative effects. For example, providing independent valuations or offering cooling-off periods can help bidders make more informed and rational decisions. Transparency in the auction process, with clear disclosure of all relevant information, is crucial in leveling the playing field and reducing the potential for manipulation. Ultimately, understanding the psychology of bidding is essential for anyone seeking to participate in auctions, whether as a buyer or a seller. Recognizing these emotional drivers and cognitive biases allows us to navigate the auction environment with greater awareness and make more informed decisions, guarding against the siren song of irrationality. Chapter 37. The impact of auction platforms on market efficiency. Why introduction? As we contemplate the ebb and flow of information within economic ecosystems, let's now turn our attention to a particularly fascinating current: the rise of auction platforms and their profound impact on market efficiency. We've previously explored the theoretical underpinnings of market structures. Now, we shall see how technology reshapes those structures, specifically through the lens of auctions. Think of an auction as a meticulously choreographed dance between supply and demand, a formalized ritual for price discovery. Auction formats and their properties. Auctions, in their essence, are mechanisms for allocating resources. But the devil, as they say, is in the details. We can broadly categorize auction formats. There's the English auction, perhaps the most familiar, where bidders openly compete, raising the price until only one remains. Then we have the Dutch auction, which starts high and decreases until a buyer accepts the price. First price sealed bid auctions demand bidders submit their highest willingness to pay, unseen, and the highest bidder wins and pays their bid. And finally, second price sealed bid auctions, where the highest bidder wins, but only pays the second highest bid. Each format possesses unique properties. The English auction, through its iterative price discovery, tends to be efficient when bidders have common values. That is, when the true value of the item is largely the same for everyone, though unknown beforehand. The Dutch auction, prone to the winner's curse, overbidding, due to uncertainty, is less efficient in such settings. Sealed bid auctions introduce strategic complexity, forcing bidders to consider the information they possess relative to their competitors. Revenue equivalence theorem and its limitations. A cornerstone of auction theory is the revenue equivalence theorem. In its idealized form, it suggests that, under certain conditions, risk neutrality, independent private values, and symmetric bidders, different auction formats will yield the same expected revenue for the seller. The classical economist found elegance in this theorem, a demonstration of the power of economic modeling. However, reality often deviates from these assumptions. Risk aversion, common values, and asymmetric information disrupt the revenue equivalence. For instance, if bidders are risk-averse, sealed bid auctions tend to generate higher revenue, as bidders inflate their bids to increase their chances of winning. In auctions with common values, the English auction often outperforms sealed bid formats, because it allows bidders to learn from each other's signals, mitigating the winner's curse. The policymaker must, therefore, understand these nuances before choosing an auction format for, say, allocating spectrum rights or selling public assets. Efficiency considerations. Beyond revenue, efficiency is paramount. An efficient auction allocates the item to the bidder who values it most highly. While the English auction excels in common value scenarios, it can falter if collusion is present. Bidders might strategically lower their bids to manipulate the final price. The Vickrey auction, while theoretically efficient under independent private values, is rarely used in practice, partly because it's perceived as too complex and susceptible to manipulation in certain contexts. Auction platforms, with their algorithmic pricing and real-time bidding capabilities, have further complicated the landscape. The rise of automated bidding strategies, using machine learning, can lead to both increased efficiency and potentially destabilizing feedback loops. Imagine an algorithmic arms race, where bidding algorithms compete to predict each other's moves, leading to volatile price fluctuations. The impact of information on auction outcomes. Information, as always, is the lifeblood of markets. In auctions, the amount and distribution of information profoundly affect outcomes. More informed bidders can make better decisions, leading to more efficient allocation and potentially higher revenue for the seller. Auction platforms, by providing access to vast amounts of data, historical prices, bidder behavior, product specifications, have the potential to level the playing field, empowering smaller bidders. However, this information is not always evenly distributed. Large, sophisticated bidders might have access to proprietary data or advanced analytics, giving them an edge over smaller players. Thus, the design of auction platforms must carefully consider the role of information disclosure to promote fairness and efficiency. Should platforms be required to disclose more information about bidding patterns? Or would such disclosure inadvertently create new opportunities for manipulation? Concluding thoughts: the evolution of auction platforms presents both opportunities and challenges for market efficiency. While technology can facilitate price discovery and improve resource allocation, it also introduces new complexities and potential pitfalls. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for the policymaker seeking to design effective regulations and promote fair competition. As we prepare to navigate the broader waters of market design, we might ponder: how will the increasing sophistication of algorithmic bidding reshape traditional notions of market equilibrium? And what are the long-term implications for price stability and market resilience? Chapter 38: Blockchain and Auctions. Transparency and Security. Good evening. Let's settle in and consider the auction. It's a fascinating dance between supply, demand, and information, often shrouded in the cloak of strategy. In essence, an auction is a market institution governed by explicit rules determining resource allocation and prices on the basis of bids from participants. Its power lies in its ability to aggregate dispersed information and translate it into a single, market-clearing price. We begin with the understanding that auctions are not monolithic. They come in a variety of formats, each with its own nuances and strategic implications. Consider the familiar English auction, also known as an ascending bid auction. Here, bidders openly compete, raising their offers until only one remains, securing the item at their final price. Think of an estate sale, conducted with dignified restraint, where the murmur of bids rises gently, then fades. Then there is the Dutch auction, a descending bid format. The auctioneer starts with a high price, gradually lowering it until a bidder claims the item. It's a more rapid, decisive process, perhaps reflecting a sense of urgency or a desire for immediate allocation. This method has found its place in settings like the sale of cut flowers in wholesale markets, their delicate beauty demanding swift transactions. The sealed bid auctions introduce a different dimension. In a first-price sealed bid auction, each bidder submits a single secret bid. The highest bidder wins and pays their bid. The strategic thinking here is quite potent. How high should one bid? Too low, and you lose. Too high, and you overpay. The optimum lies in balancing the probability of winning against the potential for regret. This strategic tension is palpable in government bond auctions, where institutions compete for sovereign debt. And then there's the Vickrey auction, a second-price sealed bid format. Again, bidders submit sealed bids, but the winner, the highest bidder, pays the price of the second highest bid. The beauty of the Vickrey auction lies in its incentive compatibility. It encourages bidders to truthfully reveal their valuations, as bidding one's true value is a weakly dominant strategy. It's a mechanism that whispers honesty, a quiet triumph of game theory. It's a gentler approach, aiming for efficiency through truthful revelation. How do these auctions perform in terms of revenue and efficiency? The revenue equivalence theorem, a cornerstone of auction theory, suggests that under certain conditions, risk neutrality, independent private values, and symmetric bidders, different auction formats should yield the same expected revenue for the seller. This is a rather astonishing result, implying that the choice of format may not significantly impact the seller's earnings. However, these conditions are rarely perfectly met in the real world. Risk aversion, correlated values, and asymmetric information all introduce complexities that can break the equivalence. Auctions are said to be efficient when they allocate the item to the bidder who values it the most. While the Vickrey auction, with its incentive compatibility, promotes truthful bidding and therefore efficiency, other formats can suffer from inefficiencies due to strategic behavior. For example, in a common value auction, where the true value of the item is the same for all bidders but unknown, the winner's curse can plague the outcome. The winner, having bid the highest, may discover that they have overpaid because their estimate of the value was too optimistic. This phenomenon underscores the importance of information in auction dynamics. Now, consider the disruptive potential of blockchain technology in the realm of auctions. Blockchain offers transparency, security, and immutability, qualities that can address some of the inherent weaknesses in traditional auction mechanisms. Imagine an auction where every bid, every transaction, is recorded on distributed ledger, visible to all participants, yet anonymized to protect privacy. This enhanced transparency could mitigate collusion, reduce fraud, and build trust among bidders. Moreover, smart contracts, self-executing contracts written in code and stored on the blockchain, can automate the auction process, ensuring that the rules are followed meticulously and that the outcome is verifiable. This automation can streamline operations, reduce administrative costs, and eliminate the need for intermediaries. The policymaker, always seeking to improve market efficiency, finds this prospect particularly appealing. However, the integration of blockchain into auctions is not without its challenges. Scalability, regulatory uncertainty, and the need for user-friendly interfaces are all hurdles that must be overcome. The classical economist, ever cautious, would remind us that technology alone cannot solve all problems. Behavioral biases and strategic considerations will continue to shape auction outcomes, regardless of the underlying infrastructure. Chapter 40: The Future of Auctions. Trends and Innovations, or Introduction. Having traversed the landscape of established auction mechanisms, from the venerable English auction to the strategic complexities of sealed bid formats, we now turn our gaze towards the horizon. What innovations lie ahead? What trends will shape the future of auctions, and how might these changes impact revenue generation and economic efficiency? Let us consider these questions with a gentle and deliberate pace. Section 1. Title: The Rise of Dynamic and Algorithmic Auctions. Content. One prominent trend is the increasing sophistication of dynamic auction formats. These are not the static, predetermined structures we've previously discussed. Instead, they are fluid systems, constantly adapting to the flow of information and the actions of participants. Imagine an auction where the rules themselves evolve in real time, guided by algorithms that optimize for specific outcomes. The goal might be maximizing revenue, achieving a fairer distribution, or even promoting certain social objectives. Algorithms play a crucial role here. Machine learning models can analyze bidding patterns, predict future behavior, and dynamically adjust reserve prices or bidding increments. This allows auctioneers to extract more value from each transaction, navigating the delicate balance between encouraging participation and securing the highest possible return. The classical economist, ever cautious, might worry about the potential for manipulation or unintended consequences. However, the policymaker sees the promise of using these tools to address societal challenges, perhaps allocating resources more efficiently in areas like renewable energy or public works projects. Section 2. Integration of blockchain and decentralized auctions. Content. Another intriguing development is the integration of blockchain technology into auction processes. Blockchain's inherent transparency and security can address some of the key concerns associated with traditional auctions, such as collusion and fraud. Imagine a decentralized auction platform where all bids are recorded on an immutable ledger, visible to all participants. This fosters trust and reduces the need for intermediaries, potentially lowering transaction costs and increasing accessibility. Furthermore, blockchain enables the creation of entirely new auction formats. For example, smart contracts can automate the auction process, ensuring that rules are enforced fairly and that payments are executed securely. While the implementation of blockchain in auctions is still in its early stages, its potential to revolutionize the field is undeniable. The initial resistance of participants reluctant to embrace novel technology is gradually giving way to a cautious optimism. Section 3. Title: Personalized and Context-Aware Auctions. Content. Looking further ahead, we can envision auctions becoming increasingly personalized and context-aware. Imagine an auction where the bidding experience is tailored to each individual participant based on their past behavior, preferences, and risk tolerance. Artificial intelligence can analyze vast amounts of data to understand each bidder's unique circumstances and adjust the auction dynamics accordingly. This could involve offering different reserve prices, providing personalized recommendations, or even creating customized bidding strategies. Moreover, auctions can become more integrated into the broader context of the user's experience. For example, an online retailer might use auctions to dynamically price products based on real-time demand, competitor pricing, and individual customer profiles. This requires a deep understanding of behavioral economics and the psychological factors that influence bidding behavior. The ethical observer reminds us to tread carefully, ensuring that personalization does not lead to unfair or discriminatory practices. Conclusion: the future of auctions is a dynamic and evolving landscape shaped by technological advancements, evolving economic conditions, and a growing awareness of the social and ethical implications of these mechanisms. While these innovations promise to unlock new levels of efficiency and revenue generation, they also present challenges that must be carefully considered. As we prepare to conclude this exploration of auctions, we must ask, what unseen market force or paradigm shift will come to dominate the next era of economic exchange? Perhaps the seeds of that revolution are already being sown, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. Let's sleep on that tonight. Mood, contemplative, and soothing. Imagine the calm, rhythmic tone of a seasoned academic, reflecting on future possibilities. Avoid any sense of urgency or excitement. Focus on creating a sense of intellectual tranquility. Title: Chapter 41. Algorithmic Collusion. The Threat of Automated Cartels. Content: yes. We were discussing the intricate dance of markets, weren't we? How prices find their equilibrium, how supply meets demand in a silent, almost ethereal agreement. Tonight, let's consider a shadow lurking at the edges of this idyllic scene: the specter of algorithmic collusion. To understand this threat, we must first revisit the auction. Auctions, at their core, are information-revealing mechanisms. They allow us to glimpse the true value of goods or services, a value often obscured by the fog of individual preferences. Think of a finely crafted antique, a spectrum license, or even ad space on a website. Each has a worth that fluctuates depending on who desires it, and how keenly. The formats are varied, aren't they? The English auction, ascending in price until only one bidder remains, a slow, deliberate unveiling of willingness to pay. The Dutch auction, starting high and descending, a game of courage and timing. The sealed bid auctions, first price and second price, each with its own delicate balance of risk and reward. These structures are meticulously designed to extract as much value as possible for the seller, while ensuring a reasonably efficient allocation of resources. The classical economist sees these auctions as elegant engines of efficiency. Revenue maximization, of course, is a key goal. But efficiency, the idea that the item goes to the bidder who values it most, is also paramount. A well-designed auction ensures that resources flow to where they can generate the greatest benefit. Think of spectrum licenses, allocated to the companies best positioned to develop innovative communication technologies. This, in theory, boosts societal welfare. However, the rise of sophisticated algorithms throws a wrench into this carefully calibrated machine. These algorithms, deployed by rival firms, can analyze auction dynamics, predict competitor behavior, and, crucially, learn to collude, without any explicit agreement or communication between the firms themselves. This is the heart of the algorithmic collusion problem. Imagine several firms employing these algorithms in a repeated auction setting. Each algorithm observes the bids of its competitors. It learns, subtly, to temper its own bids, to avoid triggering aggressive responses, to establish a tacit understanding of market shares and price levels. Over time, this learning process can lead to prices significantly higher than what a competitive market would produce. A silent, invisible cartel emerges, orchestrated by lines of code. The policymaker faces a daunting challenge here. Traditional antitrust laws are built on the notion of explicit agreements. But how do you prove collusion when there are no phone calls, no smoky backrooms, no incriminating documents. The collusion is implicit, embedded in the algorithms themselves. The intent, if it exists at all, is distributed across lines of code, a phantom in the machine. Furthermore, detecting algorithmic collusion is incredibly difficult. The algorithms can be designed to mimic legitimate competitive behavior, making it hard to distinguish between a genuine strategic response and a collusive one. Sophisticated statistical techniques are needed to analyze bidding patterns, to detect anomalies that might indicate collusion. It's a constant arms race between regulators and algorithm developers. The consequences of unchecked algorithmic collusion are significant. Higher prices for consumers, reduced innovation, and a distortion of market forces. It undermines the very foundation of competitive capitalism. We must therefore develop new tools and frameworks to address this emerging threat, a threat that challenges our understanding of collusion itself. It demands a reevaluation of how we think about intent, agency, and responsibility in an increasingly automated world. So, as the market morphs, what new market structures and participant behaviors will arise in the next economic phase, and how will we adapt our understanding to preserve fairness and efficiency? We will explore this tomorrow. Mood, soothing and analytical. Eat. Auction regulation. Balancing efficiency and fairness. We've previously considered the ideal auction, a space where value discovery flourishes and resources are allocated to their most productive uses. But the real world, alas, rarely mirrors such pristine models. Today, we turn our gaze toward the crucial role of auction regulation, understanding how it attempts to navigate the complex currents of efficiency and fairness. Think of it as carefully calibrating the mechanisms that govern these markets, ensuring they don't become distorted or exploited. At its heart, auction regulation aims to address inherent imbalances. Information asymmetry, for example, is a frequent culprit. One party might possess significantly more knowledge about the item being auctioned than others. Imagine an auction for mineral rights. If one bidder has seismic surveys revealing the presence of a vast deposit, while others rely on guesswork, the playing field is hardly level. Regulations can mandate disclosure requirements, forcing bidders to share relevant information and promote a more equitable contest. Another key area of focus is preventing collusion. Bidders might secretly agree to suppress competition, artificially lowering prices to their collective advantage. Such behavior undermines the entire purpose of an auction, diverting resources away from those who truly value them most. Antitrust laws and regulations are designed to deter collusive agreements, imposing penalties on those who seek to manipulate the market. Now, let's consider the tension between efficiency and fairness. An efficient auction allocates the item to the bidder who values it most highly. However, achieving this outcome doesn't always guarantee a perceived sense of fairness. For instance, a wealthy bidder might consistently outbid smaller players, even if those smaller players could put the resource to more innovative, socially beneficial uses. This is where regulatory interventions become delicate balancing acts. Some regulations aim to level the playing field, even if it means sacrificing some degree of pure efficiency. Consider set-aside programs, which reserve a portion of auctioned items for small businesses or disadvantaged groups. While these programs might not always allocate resources to the absolute highest bidder, they promote broader participation and greater economic inclusion, fostering a sense of fairness that can be just as valuable to the overall system. The choice of auction format itself can be a regulatory tool. A sealed bid auction, for instance, prevents bidders from observing each other's bids, potentially reducing the risk of collusion or strategic bidding behavior driven by perceived competition. Conversely, an open outcry auction provides real-time price discovery, allowing bidders to adjust their strategies based on the current market dynamics. The optimal format depends on the specific characteristics of the item being auctioned and the objectives of the regulator. Furthermore, regulations often address issues of transparency and accountability. Auction rules must be clear and accessible to all participants. The process must be auditable, allowing for scrutiny and ensuring that no undue influence is being exerted. A lack of transparency breeds distrust, undermining confidence in the integrity of the auction mechanism. Revenue generation is, of course, a frequent consideration for the entity conducting the auction. Regulations can influence the ultimate revenue yield. Reserve prices, for example, set a minimum acceptable bid, preventing the item from being sold at an unacceptably low price. However, a reserve price that is set too high can deter participation and lead to a failed auction. Striking the right balance is crucial. The classical economist might argue that the best regulation is minimal regulation, allowing market forces to operate freely and efficiently. However, the policymaker understands that real-world markets are often imperfect, requiring careful interventions to address imbalances and promote fairness. The art of auction regulation lies in finding the sweet spot, a carefully calibrated system that fosters both efficiency and equity, ensuring that these valuable mechanisms serve the broader interests of society. Ultimately, the effectiveness of auction regulation depends on constant evaluation and adaptation. As markets evolve and new challenges emerge, regulations must be updated to remain relevant and effective. Consider the rise of online auctions and the increasing complexity of financial instruments being auctioned. These developments demand innovative regulatory approaches to prevent manipulation and promote fair participation. And so, as we consider this delicate balance between facilitating market efficiency and ensuring a fair and equitable outcome, we're left to wonder what new regulatory instruments might be necessary to navigate the evolving landscape of digital auctions and the intricate ecosystems of financial markets. What novel approaches can we adopt to ensure that the spirit of open and honest exchange endures in an increasingly complex world? Case study: Google's IPO auction. Let's turn our attention now, gently, from the theoretical landscapes of auction design to the practicalities, the testing grounds where theory meets reality. Today, we'll consider a specific case study: Google's initial public offering, or IPO, conducted through an auction mechanism. This offers a valuable opportunity to examine how auction formats, bidding strategies, revenue generation, and overall efficiency play out in a real-world scenario. It's a journey from abstract principles to concrete application, a chance to observe the dance of economics in the bustling marketplace. Before Google's IPO, the prevailing method for allocating shares in such offerings was, shall we say, less than ideal. Investment banks typically underpriced the initial shares, leading to a significant pop on the first day of trading. This apparent success often masked a hidden transfer of wealth from the company offering the shares to favored clients of the investment banks. These select individuals would receive allocations at the artificially low price, then immediately profit handsomely when the stock soared. The company, in essence, left money on the table. The traditional model lacked transparency and, arguably, fairness. Think of it as a leaky vessel, spilling potential value along its course. Google, under the guidance of its founders, sought a more equitable and efficient approach. They opted for an auction-based IPO, specifically a variation known as a Dutch auction, or more accurately, in Google's case, a modified Dutch auction. In a pure Dutch auction, the auctioneer begins with a high price and progressively lowers it until buyers are willing to purchase all the available items. Google's variation allowed bidders to submit bids, specifying both the price they were willing to pay and the number of shares they desired. Consider the mechanics. Bidders submitted their offers, indicating the maximum price they were prepared to pay for each share. Once all bids were collected, an equilibrium price was determined. This price was the highest price at which all the available shares could be sold. Critically, every successful bidder, regardless of their initial bid, paid this single, uniform clearing price. This is what differentiates it from a discriminatory auction, where bidders pay what they bid. The rationale behind this format was multifaceted. Firstly, it aimed to reduce the influence of investment banks and democratize access to the IPO shares. By allowing a wider range of investors to participate, Google hoped to capture more of the value generated by the IPO, preventing it from being siphoned off by a select few. Secondly, the auction format was designed to reveal the true demand for Google's shares. The bidding process would, ideally, elicit honest valuations from potential investors, providing a more accurate assessment of the company's worth. However, the Google IPO auction wasn't without its challenges. One major hurdle was educating potential investors, particularly those unfamiliar with auction mechanisms. The complexity of the bidding process deterred some, and there was a concern that unsophisticated bidders might make irrational offers. Furthermore, some critics argued that the auction format lacked the marketing and hype traditionally associated with IPOs, potentially dampening demand. The results of the Google IPO were complex. While the auction did succeed in distributing shares more widely and reducing the initial pop compared to traditional IPOs, it also faced criticism. The final offering price was lower than some had anticipated, and the initial trading performance was somewhat volatile. Some argued that the auction process confused investors and led to a less than optimal valuation. Others maintained that the auction, while imperfect, represented a step in the right direction towards a more transparent and equitable allocation of IPO shares. Ultimately, Google's IPO auction provides a rich case study for examining the practical challenges of implementing auction theory. It highlights the importance of considering factors beyond pure economic efficiency, such as investor psychology, market perceptions, and the need for clear communication. It underscores that auction design is not a purely technical exercise, but rather a delicate balancing act between economic principles and human behavior. It reminds us that even the best design mechanisms can be influenced by unforeseen circumstances and the unpredictable currents of the market. The Google IPO served as a valuable, if somewhat turbulent, experiment. It prompted a wider discussion about the merits and drawbacks of auction-based IPOs and contributed to the ongoing evolution of financial markets. The event left a lingering question. If not this specific auction design, then what improvements or alternative auction formats might better serve the needs of both companies seeking capital and investors seeking opportunity? This question hangs in the air, a gentle hum leading us into our next exploration of market efficiency and capital allocation. Chapter 44. Case Study. Sotheby's versus Christie's, a historical perspective. Having explored the theoretical underpinnings of auction theory, it's time to ground our discussion in the realities of the marketplace. Our focus tonight will be a historical lens on the enduring rivalry between Sotheby's and Christie's, a dynamic duo that has shaped the landscape of fine art auctions for centuries. Their evolution provides a compelling case study of how auction formats, bidding strategies, revenue models, and overall efficiency have been refined over time. Think of them as two great rivers, each carving its own unique channel through the economic terrain. For decades, both auction houses operated primarily under the traditional English auction format, also known as the ascending bid or open outcry auction. This format, characterized by its transparency and dynamic price discovery, was the cornerstone of their business. Bidders, present either physically or remotely, openly compete, driving the price upward until only one remains. The simplicity of the English auction, its inherent ability to reveal information about perceived value, and its relatively low administrative overhead made it a natural fit for the art world. However, the seemingly straightforward nature of the English auction belies the complexities of bidding strategies employed by participants. Consider the winner's curse, a phenomenon where the winning bidder may have overestimated the value of the item, paying more than it's actually worth. Seasoned bidders understand this risk and often adopt strategies to mitigate it. For instance, they might employ shading their bids, bidding below their true valuation, to avoid overpaying. Sophisticated bidders might also consider the information revealed by the actions of other bidders, adjusting their own strategy in response. The auction room therefore becomes a theater of strategic interaction, a delicate dance of information and psychology. As the art market evolved, so too did the auction formats. Both Sotheby's and Christie's began experimenting with variations, incorporating elements of sealed bid auctions, or offering buy now prices alongside the traditional auction format. These adaptations were driven by a desire to cater to different client segments, increase revenue, and manage risk. Sealed bid auctions, where bidders submit their offers privately, eliminate the dynamic price discovery of the English auction, but can be useful for high-value items where public competition might deter some bidders. The introduction of buy now options provides a level of certainty, allowing bidders to secure an item immediately without the uncertainty of an auction. The quest for greater efficiency has also been a constant driver of innovation. Early auctions relied heavily on physical presence and word of mouth. As technology advanced, telephone bidding became commonplace, followed by online bidding platforms. These technological advancements expanded the reach of auctions, bringing in new bidders from around the globe and increasing overall market liquidity. Furthermore, both houses invested heavily in provenance research and authentication processes to build trust and ensure the integrity of the items offered. This investment in quality control is crucial for maintaining the reputation and long-term sustainability of their businesses. Revenue models for Sotheby's and Christie's have also undergone significant evolution. Historically, commissions paid by the seller were the primary source of income. However, as competition intensified, both houses began to introduce buyer's premiums, a percentage of the final sale price paid by the winning bidder. This shift in revenue structure allowed them to lower sellers' commissions, attracting more consignments, while simultaneously increasing their overall profitability. The delicate balance between seller and buyer commissions has become a key strategic consideration. One particularly intriguing and controversial episode in the history of these two giants involved accusations of price fixing in the late 1990s. The scandal, involving collusive agreements on commission rates, highlighted the potential risks associated with concentrated market power. This event serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us that even in seemingly sophisticated markets, the potential for anti-competitive behavior exists. Policymakers intervened, of course. The episode emphasized the importance of regulatory oversight to ensure fair and transparent market practices. In examining Sotheby's and Christie's, we see more than just two auction houses. We see a microcosm of the broader economic principles at play within auction theory. The interplay of supply and demand, the strategic behavior of bidders, the evolution of market formats, and the ongoing quest for efficiency. Their history illustrates the dynamic and adaptive nature of auctions as economic mechanisms. As we conclude, consider this. What new auction formats or bidding strategies might emerge as the digital world increasingly intertwines with the physical art market? What new challenges and opportunities will these developments present to auction participants and to the very definition of value itself? Auctions in the 21st century. A comprehensive overview and future outlook. Good evening. We gently transition tonight from our consideration of game theory to a topic deeply intertwined with it: the fascinating world of auctions. More than just gavel-thumping affairs, auctions are sophisticated economic mechanisms. Our exploration tonight focuses on the formats, the revenue they generate, and crucially, their efficiency in allocating resources. Think of auctions as intricate dances of supply and demand, where strategy and information play leading roles. At the heart of understanding auctions lies recognizing the diversity of their formats. Let's consider a few primary ones. There's the familiar English auction, also known as an ascending price auction. The price steadily rises until only one bidder remains, claiming the item. Then we have the Dutch auction, a descending price model, where the price starts high and decreases until someone shouts mine, a stark contrast in dynamics. Next, the sealed bid auctions offer a closed environment. The first price sealed bid requires bidders to submit their highest offer, with the highest bidder winning and paying that amount. A slight variant is the Vickrey auction, or second price sealed bid. Here, the highest bidder wins, but pays only the second highest bid. Such nuances alter bidding strategies considerably. The strategic incentive in the Vickrey auction, for example, encourages bidders to bid their true valuation of the item. It's a beautifully balanced mechanism. Now, let's turn our attention to the revenue generated by these diverse formats. The revenue equivalence theorem is a cornerstone of auction theory. In simplified terms, it states that, under certain conditions, risk neutrality, independent private values, and symmetry, different auction formats generate the same expected revenue for the seller. This is a powerful, and at times, counterintuitive result. However, the real world rarely adheres perfectly to these idealized conditions. Risk aversion, correlated values, and information asymmetries all disrupt this equivalence. The seller, therefore, must carefully consider these factors when choosing an auction format. For instance, if bidders are risk-averse, a first-price sealed bid auction might yield higher revenue than a Vickrey auction. The subtle dance between behavioral economics and auction design becomes apparent here. Efficiency, the ultimate goal of any market mechanism, is achieved when resources are allocated to those who value them most. An efficient auction ensures that the item goes to the bidder with the highest valuation. The Vickrey auction, as we hinted earlier, is often considered highly efficient under ideal conditions because it incentivizes truthful bidding. However, the presence of collusion, bidder rings, or shill bidding can significantly diminish efficiency, warping the signals and preventing the item from reaching its true highest valued owner. Furthermore, reserve prices set by the seller also impact efficiency. A reserve price that's too high can deter participation and lead to an unsold item, thereby reducing overall efficiency. Conversely, a strategically chosen reserve price can enhance revenue without significantly compromising efficiency. The digital age has dramatically reshaped the auction landscape. Online platforms have lowered transaction costs, broadened participation, and allowed for more complex auction designs. Consider sponsored search auctions, where advertisers bid for keywords, and their ad placement is determined by both their bid and the quality score of their addee. These are intricate, continuous auctions, requiring sophisticated bidding algorithms and data analysis. Or, think of spectrum auctions, where governments allocate licenses for wireless communication. These high-stakes auctions often involve hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars, and their design can significantly impact the efficiency and competitiveness of the telecommunications industry. The complexities introduced by these large-scale online auctions often lead to more dynamic pricing discovery than in traditional models. The presence of bots can sometimes impede the proper function of the pricing strategies as well. Looking forward, the future of auctions lies in even greater personalization and data-driven decision-making. Machine learning algorithms can be used to predict bidder behavior, optimize reserve prices, and detect collusion. Blockchain technology could enhance transparency and security, reducing the risk of fraud and increasing trust. The rise of decentralized autonomous organizations could also lead to novel auction mechanisms for allocating resources within these organizations. The classical economist might be surprised by the sophistication, but their principles remain fundamentally relevant. Auctions, therefore, are more than just sales. They are microcosms of economic forces, constantly evolving and adapting to new technologies and market conditions. As we consider this evolution, one lingering question remains: how will the increasing prevalence of AI-driven bidding strategies further reshape auction dynamics? And will human intuition still hold value in this increasingly automated landscape? Let us ponder that as we move forward.